Hey friends, this is Michael Patton. This is Theology Unplugged. You would not believe the problems I've been having today. I mean, it's supernatural. It really is. It's proof that there is a God, because there's no way these things could happen in a natural world. I mean, everything is breaking on this computer. One thing to another. The NVIDIA to the BIOS, it's just crazy. If this works, that is great. I hope I fixed it. I've put little Band-Aids on just about everything as far as I know, so I don't know enough to do this stuff. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to let you enjoy a long version of an old Theology Unplugged. This is all the way back 2005, 2006. Me, Rhome Dycke, and Greg Cromartie. I found all the old files. We lost them for a long time, but I found them all. I've got them all. And whenever I can't do something because I'm preparing, it's hard to do something every single day, something new. So I'm going to try to fill in with something so that you guys aren't left hanging. Sorry that there's not much video, because we didn't do Theology Unplugged in video back in the day. Do you know back in 2006 to 2011, we were one of the biggest podcasts out there, Christian podcasts. I mean, there wasn't that many whenever it first started. I didn't even know what a podcast was whenever I was asked to do it. I was like, what is a podcast? Why don't we just go on the radio? And we were on the radio at the same time as being on the podcast, but we finally ditched the radio and stuck with the podcast. But now it's all podcast. So here's one on epistemology. I've put 5 together. So it's longer. So 5, that'd be about an hour and a half, 2.5 hours. That's how long this is. There's re-entries on each one once the old ones start. So just, you'll hear music start up again. Sorry about that. I would edit it out, but why not? You know, you can listen to the old song, which is a great song, over and over again. It's one of the best. Greg Cromartie did such a good job hosting this. I wish I still had him. I wish I still had Rome, but here I am in Oklahoma City. They're in Dallas. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this. I will be back with Through Theology in a year, but let's see if this works out. And tell me what you think of this. Tell me if you like listening to the old classics.
Theology Unplugged.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg Cromartie. With me are the hosts of Theology Unplugged, Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke. Again, Michael is the director of the theology program at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas. The theology program, which can be found here at Bible.org, is an academic study program for lay people. Michael is an honor graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. Rhome earned a diploma in biblical studies from Columbia Bible College in Abbotsford, British Columbia, a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, and a Master of Theology degree in historical theology from Dallas Theological Seminary. Rhome is also a staff pastor at Stonebriar Community Church. Guys, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay. We've teased this huge word for 3 or 4 programs now. Let's get into it. The word is epistemology. Now, it has a broader philosophical base to it, but it also applies to theology as well, because it is the study of, Michael?
Well, it's a study of the way that people come to know truth. Okay, it's not necessarily so much, because it can be crossed over with the way, with the nature of truth. It's a little bit different than the nature of truth.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay. What are the differences there?
I have to stop this right there. I know I don't sound like myself. I had to convert this to a different bit rate. Don't know what that means, but that's my excuse for sounding like a little kid. Okay? It was 20 years ago, but I don't know how the voice, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know if you guys hear me, but I don't hear myself. But that was me just now, and that is me for the rest of the time.
How do people come to know truth? What is our methodology to accessing this truth?
Okay. Maybe another way to think about that, Greg, would be to think about, we all know things, or we all hold some things to be true. How do we make those decisions? How do we know what we know? Or how do we know what we think is true is in fact true? It's that whole aspect of how are we acquiring things that we're labeling truth in our own minds.
Sometimes you don't know how you know, you just know you know.
And That's right, and that's why we need to discuss it.
But that's an epistemology.
Yeah.
I mean, you may say, I just know. And really what you're saying whenever you say, I don't know how I know, I just know that I know, your epistemological method is a subjective method of emotional convictions. I just know that I know. But that is an epistemology, and we've got to discuss those types of things, because before we can ever broach the idea of truth and start making assumptions such as the Bible is our only source for truth, today in our culture we've got to establish that there is such a thing as truth, and that we can access that truth and give people methodology to access that truth, because everybody approaches it differently today. It's so important. The study of epistemology, although it sounds like it's the study of the apostles' wives, it's not. It is probably, there's not many things in the Christian world today that the average Christian, even though it seems overwhelming what we're talking about right now, the average Christian has got to come to terms with this. Because before we can establish that Jesus Christ is the truth, we've got to establish that truth is there and that it can be accessed.
So what you're saying then is epistemology can range from an I don't know and don't confuse me with the facts, all the way to the facts themselves, and then drawing truth out of those facts. It's all the same thing, essentially.
There's a range. Maybe a best way to think about that is there's a range of possibilities as to how we know what we know, or how we acquire knowledge, from simply experience, and or even the idea of emotionalism, as Michael said, all the way along to it's dictated to me, or it's been written down, or the group decides, and where do we make those decisions, or how are those made?
It's tied in to what we've been talking about the entire time for the last few weeks. A few weeks ago, we talked about the idea of folk theology. We talked about this idea that people believe things because they have always believed them. And they have an emotional tie, an emotional conviction that it is true. And while emotional convictions are fine, we've got to understand, are emotional convictions valid sources for you to be able to not only self-justify your beliefs, but justify them to others? Because if you have an emotional tie to something that your mom and dad taught you, it ain't going to do nothing for me. Okay?
Sure.
It'll make you passionate. It will make you very outspoken about your beliefs and want to defend them very much, because you've got that emotional conviction and emotional tie. But it doesn't do anything for the person sitting next to you, because they have no tie to that, and you can't bring them along. You see Christians all the time trying to convince people of the truth of Jesus Christ because of their inner passions. But whenever it comes to an intellectual commitment to the idea itself, there is none. And we are trying to help people understand that we have to approach truth by a certain methodology. We have to approach Christ in the Bible. We can't walk up and assume that people believe that the Bible is the Word of God. We can't walk up and quote people Bible verses whenever they don't believe the Bible. That is not part of their epistemology.
It seems to me, as we talk about this, that perhaps the whole idea of God is wrapped up in epistemology as well. I mean, if we're talking about objective truth, then there has to be some infinite reference point outside of our experience that informs that truth. So if we come to the conclusion that there is truth, then we can come to the conclusion that there is an infinite reference point. Do we not? Or is that...
That's right, and these are both questions that have to be answered. They're two different questions. First, is there truth? And second, if there is truth, how do we access that truth?
And in our culture today, the first question, most people will say, well, that's relative. What's your truth is not necessarily my
Actually,
truth.
all of the questions they'll have doubts upon. Let's say that one person doesn't believe in truth. You're exactly right. There are many people who just say, there is no real truth out there. All truth is relative. We'll talk about relativism in just a moment, but it means your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. The second one is people who do believe in truth, and you see a lot of these people, but they don't believe in our ability to come to know the truth. How do you know? I want to believe you, but how do you really know? Who can know? I hear different opinions every time I turn on the radio or the different TV stations, and you've got all these different scientific opinions, the pastor's opinions, that which is at my school. And so people are today more skeptical than they have ever been about our ability to come to know that truth. Mm-hmm. And so the second one has to do with the certainty factor. How certain can we be about the truth?
One of the challenges is always to consider, even the question of God that, Greg, you brought up. How do we know God exists? Or is that an epistemological question? Is God the source of truth? And that's to consider that our normal means of discovery is using our senses. We use our 5 senses to verify who's in the room. We look, we can see, we can touch. And we can't see, in that sense, God. We can't touch, in the same sense, God. And so then some people have this epistemology that if I can't see it, or if I can't hear it, or if I can't touch it, or I can't taste it, it doesn't exist.
That's naturalism.
Yeah, they bind it to the physical. And so this is, we are, just as an example, this is the discussion we're having as to what limits or are there limits to how we know what we know, and what, if there is truth out there, which we'll address, then how are we going to come to know it, as Michael's already said.
In epistemology, and you brought it up, Michael, is there a certainty in truth that all of us can come to?
That is something that I wish I could answer, just across the board and say, yes, there is, or no, there's not. But it depends upon the types of questions you're asking. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of the questions, people are very right today to say that how can you be so certain? I mean, even whenever we open up the Scriptures and we start dealing with certain issues, the Scriptures aren't clear on everything. They're not equally clear. And obviously, the way that I would take that is if God wrote the Scriptures and God knew how clear He was being and how we would understand it, He just wants some things not to be quite so clear. And so you ask the question, is there certainty out there? And I would say yes, on certain issues there is certainty out there. Certainly. On everything. That's right. How certain of that I am, I don't know, but we would have to approach it with such a way. Now, you brought up a good point, because the scientism of modernism being the period that preceded what is called the postmodern world, which we are living in today, which we'll talk about more as we go on. But modernism was really a rationalistic approach. And the idea was that science was going to guide our way to truth, and it was an objective way to truth so that we could know all things with certainty. The main goal was to know everything for sure. Okay?
Yeah.
Just like the scientific method or the mathematical, let's have mathematical certainty on everything, was Rhome Dycke's method. And really what we're seeing today in our world, both in the scientific realm and on the popular world, is that's just not true.
Sure. Yeah.
We can't come to that level of certainty factor, mathematical certainty about all the things that we believe, and we have to live with some tension in some things, and a lot of people just don't like it. It's all or nothing. It's either you are 100% certain or you have no idea. And I think we're going to have to try to find some balance.
I think one of the things that people attack Christianity with is this idea of certainty, just as Michael has stated. And they want to be this mathematical certainty they want to apply to all aspects of Christianity, or all aspects of the Bible, or all aspects of God's revelation. And without thinking, Christians sometimes engage them in an exercise we can't complete, in the sense that we try and show mathematically. We have ways of proving the resurrection and giving very specific options as to what must have happened. But the fact of the matter is that while people get uncomfortable with some of the tensions that theology creates, some of the tensions that the Scriptures leave and don't address, we have tensions in all our lives about everything. We don't live in an absolutely certain society on any stretch of the imagination. You can be married to someone for 30 years and still not know exactly how they might respond in any one given state. And so we try and do to the Bible what we don't do, in fact, in real life. The Bible is not a mathematical formula. And so this issue of certainty certainly plays into our discussion of epistemology and how we establish that.
Well, and the modern scientific establishment has defined away anything outside of the touch, hear, taste, feel realm. Naturalism, by its very nature, says, well, you can get metaphysical in that, but that can never come to any kind of a certainty of truth outside of the things that we can measure and taste and touch. And so how does theology then interface with those kinds of thoughts in our culture?
Well, I think we must not start with the assumption that the things that are going around in culture, such as the empiricism that you described, empiricism meaning that the only way I'll believe something is if I can see it taste it, touch it. Rationalism is the idea that the only way I'll believe it is if I can figure it out in my mind. So one requires seeing it, the other requires being able to comprehend it completely with our mind. Neither one of those is evil in and of itself until you take it to the extreme that you say, always I have to have this confirmed in my mind, or always I have to see it with my eyes. It's nice to see things with your eyes. It's nice to see things confirmed. It was nice for the apostles to see Jesus Christ risen from the grave, and it was nice for Christ to show him that, so that he could appeal to that aspect of their rationality or of their epistemology.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are those who do not see and believe." Now, what does that kind of a statement, how does that impact the subject of epistemology and theology?
Greg, that's a great question. It's the right verse to bring up because you have to look at the big picture, the whole scope of Scripture, the whole scope of God's work, which was God revealed himself in the beginning through creation, through what he created. All of it is a tribute to him. All of it is called good. And then as he works through our Hebrew Scriptures, through our Old Testament, we see God working with his people, his chosen nation, Israel, to reach all the nations. They don't get to see him other than a few interesting times when he is interacting, usually with the leader of the nation. But for the most part, they don't get to experience him with their senses. And then we have them waiting for God to act in a variety of situations. We have God acting in something that no other religion offers, which is God incarnate in a man to come and interact with us where we can experience him. And that's what the apostles, of course, were so blessed to enjoy, was seeing Christ. He didn't only just appear, but he did things for them to show that he was not bound by the physical, things like walking on the water, things like multiplying bread to feed people. But then in the end, after death and resurrection, he ascends to heaven and he leaves us the Spirit. And once more we walk by faith, understanding that God has interacted in the physical, controls the physical, and yet we still don't experience him that way day to day.
Okay. Truth in itself. You've mentioned that there can be this fuzzy idea of truth out there, and then there's a more concrete idea of truth. It seems to me, as I look at it as a layperson, that truth that is not concrete is not truth. Now, I know that's a problem of definitions. How do I get beyond that?
Well, I don't think you do. I think that that's an important distinction that you made. You have to wrestle with the question, can there be truth that is unconcrete? And once you turn it into something such as, well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me, is that really truth? We're wrestling today with the question of marriage, okay? Can two males get married, and is it still called marriage? And a lot of people are objecting, saying once you do something like that, you have violated the very definition of marriage, therefore it's not marriage. You can't just change the definition. Right. It's the same thing with truth a lot of times. Whenever people say, is there relative truth? Well, if it's relative, meaning that what's true for you is true for you and what's true for me is true for me, then we're really not dealing with the same truth. I mean, it's a whole different definition. Truth is something that isn't, like I said before, and in a metaphysical realm, in an ontological, if it actually exists, then it exists beyond us. And our statements are only true or false to the degree that they correspond to that reality that exists beyond us. So if I was to say that God exists, and that is a true statement, what I am saying is it's not just true for me, that it is a universal truth. Okay.
In other words, the very definition maybe could be exemplified in that saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it make a noise? Well, is sound based on us hearing it, or is it based on something else? The sound generated when a tree falls is the compression of the tree hitting the ground, and it creates a waveform. Even if no one's hearing the waveform is still created. In other words, you can say there was no sound, but that doesn't eliminate the idea that a waveform was created which could be heard. You could say, I didn't hear the tree fall, but that still doesn't change the fact that it fell and created a sound. In other words, it doesn't matter what position people take. I heard it, I didn't hear it, I don't think it made a sound. The truth stands outside of people's experience, and it in fact made a sound.
Now, that is a modern view because that's scientifically proven. We've proven it every time. If a tree falls, it makes a waveform. It creates pressure waves in the air and so forth. Those who, however, who originated that little riddle would say, how do you know? You weren't there. Maybe that time it didn't make a sound. And that seems to be where our culture is going today.
It does, and that brings up a good point of the transition in epistemology. Again, let me review just so people are on the same page. Epistemology, and I'm defining this according to Webster's dictionary, is the theory or science of the method or grounds of knowledge, most basically. If I was to ask you, how do you know what you know, you're going to answer according to your epistemology. So we have just talked about how we are moving from a time in which people primarily looked for certainty, and in that certainty they were looking for it through two ways. One is the empirical method. If I don't see it, then it ain't true. Or the rational method. If I can't figure it out, then it ain't true. Now we're moving to a time, and I'm going to throw out some big words here, just to help us keep these things in perspective, but they're important words for us to understand. These are epistemological words. We're moving into a time of relativism. Relativism basically says this: it is the belief that all truth is determined by some group. Okay? So,
that sounds like 1984.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, it may be in the situation where if I was talking to Rome and I said, Rome, I know that you believe that's true, but look where you have grown up. You have grown up in a Western world. You live in America, and of course you're going to believe that. And so it is true for you because your culture believes that. But it's not true for everybody. It's not true for an Eastern culture. That's relativism. That's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does that then impact theology, especially Christian theologians? What do you have to do as you interface with that culture and with theology? How do you put the two together?
You can see that at a very basic level, even in how some believers study the Bible. They read it and they ask, and they sit in a circle and they say, what does it mean to you? And when they say, what does it mean to you, it's sort of like if the group can come to a consensus on meaning, then we've got it. We've got a relative meaning, rather than asking the real question was, what did it mean when it was written in its original context? And ultimately, what does it mean, which is the timelessness of truth.
Which is that whole, the theological process we've been talking about over the past weeks.
Yeah.
Michael?
Listen, everybody who's listening, get out your pen and paper, write these down. These are important. All of these terms. You've got relativism. That truth is defined by some group. You've got subjectivism, which is very similar and used synonymously with relativism, but this idea is that the truth is determined by an individual. And so instead of saying, Rome, you believe that because you have grown up in this culture, I would say, Rome, you believe that because your experiences in your life situation have caused you to have an inward bent towards that. And that's fine for you, Rome, because it helps you. So all the deal is focused on you. Subjectivism. The subject is the bearer of the truth. Now, another one that's important for us to understand today that our culture is moving towards, not only relativism, subjectivism, but skepticism. The skeptic would say that the beliefs that you hold cannot be known with certainty. And so it'd be like, Rome, I know that you believe this, but gosh, how can you be so certain about it? You can't be so certain that the people who believe something different than you are wrong and you are right. How can you be that certain? And so it's an issue of certainty. Okay, another one.
It's an issue of undermining someone's dogmatic position. A skeptic always can undermine it.
You're just trying to erode.
That's right.
Erode their faith.
And if you're a hard skeptic who wants to erode, you're trying to get them to show a little bit of doubt. And if Rome says, no, okay, I'm not as certain about this as I am about other things. Oh, I gotcha. If you're not 100% certain, you really don't believe it, let's move on, and I've shot holes in your argument, which is really not true, but we'll get to that. The next one is perspectivism, okay? We've got all these isms. They're a lot of fun. Perspectivism, if you're a perspective type thinker, you'll say, okay, I might believe the right things, but there are a lot of other people around that can contribute, that understand it differently than I do. And so they might be able to add to my understanding of a particular belief. So the belief cannot become to be fully known and certainly known just by myself. I have to have a group of people. And as we all look at the same truth, we can all describe it differently, and then we start to build this collage that whenever you back up, man, it looks good.
Now, how is that different from church councils and dogmatic theology, where we come to an understanding together as a body of believers?
The key difference is understanding the philosophy behind it. In perspectivism, it's synthesis. It's taking two positions and synthesizing them together. A creed was not written that way. It was a debate as to, are we stating this doctrine correctly? Are we being fair with, is God triune? Or is Christ fully God and fully man? This 100% deity, 100% humanity, called the hypostatic union of Christ. And so the difference is synthesis, perspectivism, versus working through a position to come to hold it solely and completely. And that's the difference as to how creeds were often formed.
Here's a good example as well, is that Rome can't understand. If you're married, okay, you've got a man and a woman, and we would say only together did God bring them together to say that you are complete. And so whenever you're dealing with issues such as in counseling, and you're counseling a man and his wife, you're not trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong and make them both come together and agree with each other, the other perspective, whatever that may be. We're saying that only together can you start to understand the truth as a whole. So you need to consider each other's views. And whenever men and women bring their two components in their epistemology together, then the truth can be seen more clearly, because it can be seen both rationally and emotionally, and all of those different perspectives can be brought in. So perspectivism just values everything. Now let me go to another one. There's another one that's important for us to understand, and it's pragmatism. Pragmatic view of truth is that truth is ultimately defined by that which works, or that which comes to the best outcome.
The best example I like to use for this is the issue of murder. Murder is not right, murder is not wrong, but pragmatically speaking, it's better for our society not to have murder, so our society is ongoing. In other words, we're not really taking a stand on truth as it's murder is right or murder is wrong. It's just that, well, it's no good to lose people, so it's no good to have people eliminated for no reason, or it's no good to have people eliminated for an arbitrary reason. So pragmatically speaking, let's say we're against murder, not based on anything other than convenience of society.
That's right. And so pragmatically speaking, let's say we want to have a society where people don't fear. Okay? Well, if they fear more, if there's murder going on, let's outlaw murder. Not because murder is some objective truth that exists beyond us, but because we want people to be comfortable. And so therefore, we will outlaw things based upon the end that we're trying to meet. A lot of things we do that way. Divorce. Let's talk about that. People come in all the time to my office and they say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a divorce. I say, why? I'm just not happy in this situation. Okay, so you're a pragmatist. Your end goal is to be happy, right? Okay, and if your end goal is to be happy and you feel like the divorce will get you to the happiness, then that is what you should do. That's what they really want me to say, but it's very difficult. We're all pragmatists in a lot of ways. I mean, sure. I'm not jumping on anybody because I'm a pragmatist a lot of times. Just like I'm a subjectivist many times. I don't mean to be, but I jump into the bandwagon sometimes because I want the ends to fit.
But you don't codify those things in your theology. You don't bring these principles into as you do theology. How is it that with all of these ideas, and I would assume all of those come under the umbrella of postmodernism, correct? How do we avoid epistemological anarchy? Because it seems like all of a sudden every foundation of truth is thrown away with each of those that you
listen
mentioned.
To Theology Unplugged.
Okay. There you go, friends. We're going to fix you.
Greg, that's the key point. And the key point is that if you don't examine this, if we don't have this discussion, we have epistemological anarchy. It's well described, where we don't know what to accept. The average person who is heavily influenced by the media doesn't know what to accept other than that which it's given. Someone who never has this conversation, who never thinks back and says, hey, what if what I'm taking in isn't actually correct? What if what I'm taking in is in fact leading me in a way that may not in fact be true? Or what if I've never been able to think about these big questions in life? What's my purpose here? Why was I created? Or where do I go when I die? Or what happens when I die? Those types of questions, that's where we often find ourselves. And that only reaffirms the need for one more point in this discussion. We've had relativism, we've had subjectivism, we've had skepticism, we've had perspectivism, we've had pragmatism. But the final one is objectivism, the belief that truth is an objective reality that exists whether someone believes it or not. That's different from the other 5 positions. That's fundamentally different from the epistemological anarchy that you've already mentioned, where people have no stake that they can ultimately drive into the ground.
Would it be fair to say that for the average person, once they land on any one of these, it becomes concrete to them? Isn't it self-refuting to say all things are relative?
Well, I think that is a good question, and we're going to open up a whole new can of worms.
Let's save that then for next time. How about that, guys? Great discussion, and we will continue that with postmodernism and a little bit more about modernism and further from there on our next program. We're glad you've joined us. A reminder that Michael and Rome will be taking your questions on future programs. Email them to theologyunplugged@bible.org. For Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke, I'm Greg Cromartie. We invite you to join us again.
Theology Unplugged.
I think theology's for the clergy. I just believe in Jesus.
Certain hermeneutics of eschatology demand an exegetical approach.
I think you shouldn't question what you were taught in church. Isn't that blasphemy or something?
Theology Unplugged.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg Cromartie. With me are the hosts of Theology Unplugged, Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke. Michael is the director of the theology program at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas. It's a northern suburb of the city of Dallas. The theology program, which can be found at Bible.org, is an academic study program for lay people. Michael is an honor graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. Rome earned a diploma in biblical studies from Columbia Bible College in Abbotsford, British Columbia, a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, and a Master of Theology degree in historical theology from Dallas Theological Seminary. Rome is also a staff pastor at Stonebriar Community Church. And how is it working together, guys? You're with each other all the time, and here you come into the studio and you record this.
I know we office right next to each other as well.
It's kind of like a marriage, it seems.
Basically, we live unplugged. we spend all our time talking about these things and degenerating down to X's and O's and who's always right. And I think it's me.
I think it's Rome, too.
That's why we don't agree.
There's some agreement coming up here somewhere.
It's a lot of fun, though. It really is.
Well, let's get back into it. In our last program, we ended discussing just slightly postmodernism. Let's jump into it with both feet this time. And let's begin with a definition of postmodernism. I suspect that in our last program, some of those classifications of truth all blend together in postmodern epistemology and in quasi-theology, if you could call it that for them. Describe it. What is it?
Well, it's very difficult to describe it in just one sentence and have everybody agree. I mean, there's just no way. Whatever I say here, somebody's going to say, no, you got it wrong. And so we've got to be very broad at first to understand that it encompasses a cultural movement, a cultural norm, a cultural way of thinking, in which the culture today is moving. They're moving away from a standard that says truth is absolute and truth is knowable to one where they say truth is relative and truth is uncertain. And so that would kind of broadly speaking cover everybody. Now, more narrowly, we can say that there's postmodern people out there who do not believe in truth at all. Okay? Whenever you begin to talk about truth, they will say, well, that's just your truth. There's no such thing as real objective truth. There's nothing out there beyond your thoughts, like Rome talked about last time with the tree falling. There's no reality outside of your own mind. You create your own reality. And so if you believe in God and you believe in Jesus Christ and it does you good, fine. That is pure postmodernism. Now, there's another influence within our culture today, which might also be called postmodernism and oftentimes is called postmodernism. And the idea here is that truth is existing, but we can't really know it. I don't have an ability to come to terms with truth with certainty.
Sort of an epistemological agnosticism, essentially. I can't know.
Yeah, that's
Which
right.
then you're making a pretty clear statement about truth.
Exactly. I mean, that's a very good way to describe it, epistemological agnosticism. The idea is that it's not like atheism, that God doesn't exist. It's just I don't know, and I can't be certain about anything.
These are smart people, postmodernists, those that have put together the postmodern view of the world.
Well, since we're unplugged, we'll say they're smart people,
Okay.
But if you're being formal, you have to act like they're really dumb. I mean, I joke around about that, but that's right. I mean, a lot of these people are smart in that they really do know better than some of us as Christians, that we can't be as certain as we like to think we are.
Essentially, they're deconstructing truth itself, the word. They're taking it out of the language as they make statements that they believe you should adhere to. I don't get it.
Greg, I think the easiest way to approach this is understand the context in which it falls. When we study the scripture, our hermeneutics demand us to ask, what's the context of the verse? What's the context of the passage? Same thing applies here. What's the context of postmodernism? As we think about that, we think about the actual word, postmodernism. And the way I like to throw it, and like Michael said, any way we define it, we're going to get ourselves in trouble in light of there's no one standard definition. As a matter of fact, the definition of postmodernism is very postmodern. It can't be nailed down. But it does fall in a context, and maybe the context will shed some light on what it is and what it isn't. Postmodernism, merely the name, comes from the idea of this is something after or post after the modern era.
Which was characterized by the scientific method.
Yeah, really, what we do in history is we try and find some major events that shape the world. It's not that those major events, when they happen, someone said, oh, this is the dawn of a new era, but they help us to formulate that idea. Last week, when we were together, Michael mentioned Rene Descartes, and he really came up with the banner that we hang modernism on, and that was, I think, therefore I am. The very definition of who he was based on his ability to reason. And so the world began, and it wasn't some kind of a unified movement, but as we look backwards, studying history, we can see that it's widespread, and it definitely affected people's epistemology, how they thought. They thought if we can reason something through, and that has to do with technology, that has to do with science, that has to do with all the industrial revolution, it has to do with the development of philosophy, it even affects theology. If we can reason it, because we're reasonable people, in other words, we have the capacity to reason, then we can in fact come to conclusions on truth, come to conclusions on what's good and what's bad, come to conclusions on what to believe, those types of questions. What's happened is, after this era of modernism,
Which lasted,
it just depends on how you want to label it, but really, let's say it lasts into halfway through the 20th century.
and it started
In the 16th century. So from the 16th century to the 20th century, and this is debatable, but just so someone can hang their hat on something, I would put modernism from Rene Descartes until the Second World War and the atrocities that happened in Europe. And at that point, we begin to say that, you know what? The more reasonable we are, the more we can reason, the more we can develop technology. The Second World War, if you remember, was a war that was very fast-paced. And it was based on airplanes and tanks, which had never been used before in the ways that they were now being used. And people said, all our creativity, all our technology, all our industrial capability is destroying us. And so we want to get beyond modernism. And that's really what postmodernism is. It's going beyond modernism, and it's rejecting this idea of I think, therefore I am.
Is it fair to say then that, let's take something from pop culture. John Lennon's song Imagine. Is that the anthem of postmodernism? Is that the objective? His objective is there to say, if we all don't believe in things so hard, if we don't hold these passions, we'll all live in peace and everything will be wonderful. Imagine there's no heaven, no hell, no country. Is that the natural outgrowth of postmodernism? And is that why it arose?
It could be. Now listen to this. All right, you've trusted in science. You've trusted in science all your life. Science is something that is objective. It is something that is based upon mathematical formulations. It's based upon observation. Empiricism and rationality both play a part in science. And then all of a sudden, what you've trusted in, let's bring up a very relevant example for today. Let's take the food pyramid, right? How much fat are you supposed to eat each day?
I have no idea.
Go according to the food pyramid. What does it say?
I have no idea.
Well, the scientists do.
I just eat when I'm hungry.
How much fat?
As much as I can handle.
All right. Good example for some people out here, not for you two guys. That's fine. The food pyramid is based upon a pyramid, okay? That's why it's called the food pyramid. At the very top is a very little serving of fat.
Okay, I see where you're going. All right.
Now, it's been trusted in for 25 years because science came up with it, right? Mm-hmm. And if science came up with it, just eat according to the food pyramid and you're going to be fine. If all else fails, all other Atkins, whatever it else fails, go back to the food pyramid. Well, what we're finding out now is that science is saying, oops, sorry guys, food pyramid wrong. We're going to bring out a new one here pretty soon. Just wait before you know how to eat. Now, just put yourself in the average person's shoes, okay? They've trusted in the so-called objectivity of science for so long, and now it's saying, sorry guys, that wasn't right.
I guess the example you're giving is the issue of carbs and how you used to have to eat a lot of carbs. You wanted carbs. You wanted to. It was really the basis of our diet was getting lots of carbs. And today, the big thing is to cut down carbs, cut off carbs.
Yeah. And we don't know who to listen to anymore. Science isn't doing things right. The preachers on TV are all saying different things. Doesn't matter who you talk to, they believe different things in the scientific world today. The reporters, the politicians, who do you trust? Mm-hmm. Okay? Now sympathize with this person, seriously. I mean, that is a hard situation to grow up in. And for me to come on as a preacher and say, I'm really telling you the truth, though. Come here. I've really got it. I don't blame the person for being skeptical.
Sure.
I don't blame the person for almost throwing their arms up in the air and listening to the guy in the university who says there's no such thing as truth. That becomes more attractive based upon, as Rome said, post-World War II, how everything has kind of fallen apart. We're not as great as we thought we were at coming to terms with our understanding of truth.
And in many ways, it's often the nice barometer for this is technology. We really thought technology would be the answer. We really thought that all our inventions, all our mechanization of society would in fact make life easier. But even today, as we enjoy the comforts of our own home, having a dishwasher did not ultimately change the world. It cleans our dishes. It also burns them out faster than it used to. And there's ongoing things that technology...
That was the best example you could come up with.
I was right off the top of my head.
Hey, I'm into this. Go ahead.
But ultimately, technology didn't save us. While computers are tremendous in what they can do and how they can help, they can be used for good, like all the Bible programs and Bible software you can get, and they can be used for evil. They can be used to spread things that shouldn't be spread. They can be used for destructive means. Technology in and of itself, while it was championed 50 years ago, we've gone far beyond what we ever dreamed, and yet we know that that's not really where the answer is. The faster computer, the clearer screen, the bigger, the faster, the smarter, none of that is where the answer is. And like Michael said, there is a sense of hopelessness. So many opinions and no sense of certainty, and I'm going to even add something to that, no sense of certainty that transcends our current generation. Nothing that ties us to all humanity through all time, unless there's objective truth.
Which even they, in their statements, give some hint towards, because whenever they're making their postmodern truth statements, is that not objective?
Well, again, it's very difficult to say they and be monolithic.
Sure.
In the sense of saying they, and it covers everybody. Most basically, what's a good lay definition for postmodernism? It is the state in which our world exists, in which man no longer trusts in man. We don't trust in ourselves and our abilities.
And so if you can't trust in man, and God has not planted an obelisk in the middle of Washington, D.C. that says, "Here I am," and pointing up, then we have nothing to trust at all.
That's right. That's right. And the question for us Christians in struggling with this is we've got to be gracious, because we don't want to broad brush everything and wipe out the concerns of this movement, okay? Because I don't. I understand where the person's coming from. I get the same type of feelings whenever I begin to hear all these different opinions. Mm-hmm. We need to be reflective about these things. We need to understand that these people who were created in the image of God have real, true concerns. Now, some of them Some of them, this whole epistemology, this whole way of thinking, is an excuse to live a certain way. Now, let me distinguish really quickly between two types of postmoderns. Okay, and this might help us just to get them into categories, so we're not, jumping all over every one of them without, segregating. There's what could be called hard postmodernism. There's what could be called soft postmodernism. Now, the hard postmodernist is someone.
That's the way I like my ice cream too. Hard and soft. I like it. I like it usually soft.
Okay. Well, you might like soft postmodernism better too. Hard postmodernism.
Waffle cone or sugar cone?
I like waffle.
You guys are wearing me out.
Go ahead.
I got some good stuff coming, and it's going to be lost if you
talking
about ice cream.
Hard postmodernism.
Okay, hard postmodernism.
Hopefully we won't unplug you.
All right. Hard postmodernism is the belief that there is no such thing as truth. Okay? And I think that's the thing that you keep on getting frustrated about as I see you over there.
Yes.
You're frustrated with the hard postmodern. There's no such thing as truth. And your statements are...
I grew up in a modern world. So, I mean, that's why it's so foreign to me. Now, I get where you're coming from. And I also, in fact, I grew up in the bridge between the modern era and the postmodern era. So I can see both of them. But if I think, therefore I am.
Hey, and you've said that well, Greg, that you grew up in the modern world and recognize in a way we're describing an epistemology, but in a way we're also just simply describing culture. You grew up in a world that had embraced the epistemology of modernism. And now it looks like our world is embracing the epistemology or maybe even the lack of epistemology of postmodernism. And what we're going to do, Michael will finish defining the hard and the soft, and we'll move to how then does the church or how then does theology interact with our world regardless of its epistemology, modern or postmodernism.
Okay.
What's soft postmodernism?
Glad you asked. Soft postmodernism as compared to hard postmodernism. Hard, no truth at all. Okay? Soft, there is truth, but how in the world can we come to know it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
It's more that agnosticism we talked about.
That's earlier. Right. Difference between an atheist and an agnostic. An atheist says there's no God. The agnostic says I just can't know about God.
Right.
Doesn't deny that there is a God. Same thing. Hard postmodernism says that there is no truth, and the soft postmodern would say we just can't come to know truth. Or they might just have doubts about their abilities to come to know truth. Remember, it's a lack of trust in man. They don't even trust themselves. And so if they sit there and they come to a conclusion, maybe they're even reading Scripture, and they say, wow, this seems true. And then all of a sudden they go, boy, but, there's probably a lot of other interpretation. Who am I to say that I'm right about this? And so it's very difficult. You have your truth in limbo.
It seems that leads to nihilism.
Both of them could, for sure. I mean, hard postmodernism is nihilism, incarnate. It is something that you can't help but become a nihilist. Nihilism, simply nothingism, literally speaking, but it's the idea that you're in total despair. There's no purpose for life. There's no reason for existence. And hard postmodernism certainly leads toward that. If there's no truth, then the truth of being alive is no better than the truth of being dead, because there's no truth that guides them. The truth of liberty is no better than the truth of anarchy. The truth of lying is no better than the truth of telling the truth, because there's no such thing. Nihilism is produced from that.
Yeah, I wonder, at times when I read postmodernist literature, I wonder, how does this person keep from putting a gun to his head and pulling the trigger?
And Greg, that's the question. The question is this a theory? How practical is this?
How do you live it out?
Does someone actually live in a postmodern way?
Which postmodern way? Keep on defining those things, because broad brushing here.
Okay, how does someone live either as a hard postmodernist or as a soft? Let's take the soft as an example. Not that there is no truth, but just truth can't be known. You can hold that as a theory. You can apply that to your friends and what they believe, the religion that they practice. But you know what? When we get into our cars and we drive down the street, if you're driving in America, you drive on the right-hand side. You don't say, well, I'm going to drive on one or the other side and I've just chosen to drive on the right. No, you actually drive on the right. As a matter of fact, you have no options to drive on the left-hand side of the road. You actually live differently than you think. And this is part of the disconnect that we have. Postmodernism is in many ways expressed, but often not in fact lived out. There's a difference between our culture's epistemology and what it means to be Christian. We have some churches who might want to say, well, we want to really reach today's generation, so we're going to be postmodern Christians. Be careful. Be careful, because a postmodern Christian is taking a view, whether it be a soft postmodern or a hard postmodern. Is that what you want to say about God? Do you want to either say that the truth of God doesn't exist, but I'm going to be a Christian nonetheless? Some kind of a hard postmodern Christian? Or do you want to say that the truth of God exists, but I don't know what it is, and thus devaluing the Bible and being a soft postmodern Christian? Rather, these terms define or help to explain where culture is at. And we are called to be Christian to our culture, whether it be modern or postmodern. And that is the thing that has ramifications for the church.
It seems what we're saying here is that postmodernism is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad thing. Are there any good points?
You keep on, I mean, both you guys are going that direction. I'm over here saying, gosh, you guys are being too hard on the poor postmodernists, because I see myself to some degree as a sympathizer with postmodernism. I really do.
So there are some good points.
Oh, sure. I think it brings in a lot of good things. I do agree with Rome that Christians should not necessarily call themselves modern, postmodern, hard postmoderns. We shouldn't really label ourselves that way. We should, in some sense, transcend culture, transcend the thinking of culture, deriving the good things out and using those as points of contact and witness. But you know, we've got to understand that the postmoderns are postmoderns to different degrees. Okay, even the soft postmodernist. One soft postmodernist may say there is truth out there, but we cannot. Okay, a definite statement. We cannot come to know that truth. Well, that's a contradictory statement in itself. How do you know that we cannot? You just came to the conclusion of a truth statement that we cannot come to know truth. Exactly. How certain are you of that? But there's a lot of them that just really are the way they are, in the sense that they say, I'm just not sure. How can you be so sure about these things? And I think that we need to grab a hold of that element of it. And we as Christians need to make people understand that that's the way that the Bible is set up. There's a lot of things that we're not going to be so sure about. And we need to have some doctrinal hierarchy in our theologies, so that whenever we're saying, yeah, you're right, you know, it's very difficult to come to a conclusion on that passage, and there's a lot of valid interpretations out there that could be right. But whenever it comes to this issue, let's say the resurrection of Christ, the bodily resurrection of Christ, there isn't any doubt.
So essentially what you're saying, there are some things that we can break fellowship over, and other things that we're just going to have to hold that intention and discuss as brothers and sisters in Christ.
The words we can use are, there's some things that are essential for Christianity and some things that are non-essential. And I think Michael has a very valid point, and that's that we don't need to either pit the church against postmodernism or modernism, nor do we need to become that to be Christian. My point is merely that we need to interact with them, and we need to understand them. We need to understand our culture. I agree with Michael. Postmoderns are asking some very, very good questions that is very healthy for the church. It's very healthy for theology. How much do we really know? How much can we really say? How knowable is our God? There is an answer to that. But it is healthy to ask those types of questions and engage them with where they are at.
Let me ask you both, okay? This will be something to demonstrate it and get very unplugged, and y'all are going to be mad at me afterwards for this, but hey, we're unplugged. How sure are you on a scale of 1 to 10, okay? On a certainty factor. 10 is the surest that you can be, okay? You're surest you are about anything in this life. It's kind of like a 10 is, I am sure that I exist, okay? How sure are you that God exists in your theology on a scale of 1 to 10?
Rome's looking at me. He wants me to take the first step.
Come on, just jump in.
I've actually thought about that lately. It wasn't in relation to God, but it was some other theological issues. It was about the knowability.
You're dodging, man. You're dodging.
I'm sliding like a baseball player. It was about knowing that I'm saved. Can you really know that you are going to heaven?
That's good.
It's another similar question.
Let's say,
and I would say, I'm going to give you a number.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a number. I'd say it's somewhere between 5 and an 8.
Okay. How sure are you, Rome, that God exists?
I was going to use the number 7. There are lots of philosophical proofs, but with a gun at my head, I don't, bottom line, know 100%.
Okay, I was hoping to get a 10 out of both of you all, but I am going to, listen, audience, I am going to have a session with these guys after we go off and really try to convert them, so do not worry.
Okay, I'm a 10.
Let me say
I'm
it this
11.
way. let me say it this way. That's intellectual, but I live like it's a 10.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So you've got an intellectual certainty and an emotional certainty on both of them.
Yeah.
Emotionally certain, you're a 10. Mm-hmm. Intellectually certain, you're a 7. Okay, that's a good way to put it. Okay, now let's move down the line. Let's just say that a 10 represents as sure as you can be. Not absolute certainty, but as sure as you can be. Okay, and there's probably not many things in the life that you're more sure of than that God exists. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go ahead and put you both at a 10 right now. I'm saving them. So
I love it on a curve.
You're a 10 on this.
Yeah.
Let's ask this question now. Okay, you're a 10 that God exists. How sure are you that you are saved eternally? Okay,
I'd have to say probably 5 or 6.
Okay, you're not working on the curve that I gave you.
Well, you mean start with God as a 10?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was back at the first one. I love curves. So let's go. Let's. Yeah, it still has to be beyond 50%. I would say.
Okay.
For me personally, and I certainly live like it's a 10.
Okay.
Again, boy, that's a very tough question. Intellectually, I have to say, maybe it is a 5.
Well, the point is, either way, it's going to be below that God exists to some degree.
Sure.
And then you move on down the line. Are you sure that Christ is going to come before a great tribulation and rapture us out of the world as a church?
That's a great story, isn't it? No, I
mean, you might be a 0 on that, or even a negative.
No. Whenever I have to make a decision, I say, that's the only thing that I can see intellectually makes reasonable certainty. But if you're going to pin me down on it and put a gun to my head, I'm going to say, I don't know, 2.
Yeah, and see, you're moving down, and you're showing.
Hey, wait a minute! I'm the only one that's been answering these things.
I know.
Where's
Rome? Is just warming out. He left the room, and he just now came back. He had to go to the bathroom while we were asking these questions. Listen,
mark me down 1, 8, and 1, 0.
Okay. The idea here is that a lot of times whenever Christians preach from the pulpit, they act as if there's no degree of certainty with all of these issues. Whether I'm teaching about the resurrection of Christ, the existence of God, my assurance of salvation, all the way down to things that aren't quite so clear, such as the pre-tribulationalist rapture, I am going to preach that with the same passion.
Right.
And the same conviction. And in postmodernism, they see that as hypocritical. They see right through that. They see the disagreements, and they see the separation that causes. And so they not only come to this with a lot of confusion, saying, gosh, why are you so sure about that? The Bible doesn't seem that clear on this. Mm-hmm. Then they will start to say, maybe you're not that clear about everything. If you're preaching this much about the resurrection or the rapture, the pre-tribulationalist rapture, there's a lot of other good people that disagree with you. How much am I going to trust you about the other things that you say? How much am I going to trust you about the existence of God and your assurance there? I cannot trust your emotional commitments. That's basically what the postmodern is saying. Your emotional commitments are your emotional commitments. And so unless you show some type of hierarchy within your intellectual certainty, then you're not going to have a witness to the postmodern today. And so we need to make people understand that. We need to make ourselves understand that there's some things that are more clear and there's some things that are less clear. Does God exist? 10. Did Christ rise from the grave? 10. Is he coming back? 10. When's he coming back? Well, I don't know. We're going way down the scale on this.
Yeah.
What is the nature of man? Does he have a true free will or not? We got to go down a little bit on those types of things.
Sure. Rome?
I think it's important to understand, Michael, that you brought out a characteristic, or what I'd even call a hallmark of postmodernism, which is so healthy, and that's the fact that more than valuing reason and empiricism, the postmodern values authenticity. That idea that you can't hold everything believing it 100%, even those squirrely things. The absolutes of the Christian faith, we don't waver from them at all. But some of the other things that just aren't clear, that we can authentically say, hey, I'm not that sure. I'm not totally positive on this, and I want to be open with you. I believe it, but my certainty about my belief isn't a 10.
Let me tell you something, and I know we're about out of time here. The moment you start to show an uncertainty in issues, and you're not so dogmatic about everything, I don't mind if you're dogmatic about a few things, but the moment you start to show uncertainty, and you start to show, like Rome said, this authenticity, your value, in my mind, goes way up. And that's the way the postmodern thinks. The trust factor has just moved up 10 notches with the postmodern, because it was at 0 before you started. Now it's at 9.
Sure. Wow. Great discussion. Where do we go next time, guys?
Postmodernism.
Postmodernism. Well, let's get back to that then, and we'll discuss some
We'll talk about a transition and a little bit more about postmodernism. I think there's some things we still need to wrestle with.
That sounds great.
How do you know there's a next time?
Well, I'm about a 5 on that.
I trust you a lot more now.
I'm so glad. Friend, you be sure to be here for that. A little more levity and a lot more truth, if we can say that in a postmodern world. That'll be coming up on the next Theology Unplugged. A reminder here that Michael and Rome will be taking your questions on future programs. And yeah, you can ring Michael. Ask him the questions that he asked us today, and we will require he answer them. Well, for Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke, I'm Greg Cromartie. We invite you to join us again for Theology Unplugged.
Theology Unplugged.
I think theology's for the clergy. I just believe in Jesus.
Certain hermeneutics of eschatology demand an exegetical approach.
I think you shouldn't question what you were taught in church. Isn't that blasphemy or something?
Theology Unplugged.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Greg Cromartie. With me are the hosts of Theology Unplugged, Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke. Michael is the director of the theology program at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas. The theology program, which can be found at Bible.org, is an academic study program for lay people. Michael is an honor graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. Rhome earned a diploma in biblical studies from Columbia Bible College in Abbotsford, British Columbia, a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, and a Master of Theology degree in historical theology from Dallas Theological Seminary. Rhome is also a staff pastor at Stonebriar Community Church. Guys, welcome back. Boy, I hope this is not as riotous as it was last time. How do you combine ice cream and do you believe in God on a scale of 1 to 10? We did it last time.
It's all part of our theology.
You have an interesting theology. Well, last time, in fact, Michael, I'll address this to you. You asked some questions, and I kind of discovered I have a little bit of postmodern in me. And I thought I grew up in a modern world.
Well, I think whenever you talk about these things that we've been talking about, when we talk about the sympathizing with the postmodern movement and what we talked about last time and the issues that they're really dealing with an uncertainty factor, and whenever you separate between the hard postmodernist who says that there is no truth and the soft postmodernist who on a scale to one degree or another says it's very difficult to come to know truth, you begin to sympathize with them. You begin to see a world that has so many different truths that are offering. I mean, turn on your internet and begin to surf the web. In the last 20 years, we have had access to the entire world now at high speed. At any time, we can download whatever we want, be able to see whatever we want, whatever's going on across the world. We are in the backyards of people who are in China. And as we're in their backyards, we're seeing they live in a different culture than us. They grew up with different theologies than us. What about that child right there that I can see with my own eyes now, and their parents who have taught them their whole lives something different than I have been taught my whole life? Do I have an intellectual commitment to what I believe, or do I just have an emotional commitment? And we begin to understand that we are really filled with a lot of folk theology. Mm-hmm. That the reasons why we believe things is because our parents, and people will tell us that in the postmodern world all the time. You'll hear that. Have you ever heard, either one of you, oh, you just believe what you believe because you have always grown up that way?
Yeah, I've heard it a lot.
Well, I mean, what do you say? Is it true?
To a degree.
That's right.
And I think it's even bigger than that. I think it also shows that we are a product of our culture. We are a product of our society. It would be virtually impossible to say you have no postmodern inklings in light of where our culture and our society is going. To be a member of a culture and society is often to think and act like the culture and society. And the difference that we as Christians have is to see how our faith plays out in light of the culture we live in. And that becomes the dynamic which really is the crux of the discussion that we're having.
And we as Christians, we don't want to give in and say, oh, yeah, you're right, I do believe this way because my parents had taught me, because we're essentially saying it's not true. I mean, it's the same thing as saying it's not true. And so we say, no, I believe this way, and we try to come up with all kinds of defenses for it, and usually they're insufficient for the world today.
Sure.
And what we need to do is, a lot of us, I grew up as a Christian. Okay, it doesn't mean I wasn't a Christian. I mean, an emotional commitment to things does not necessarily mean it's not a true commitment.
Sure.
I had a true commitment to Christ very young. But we do need to come to terms sometime with our beliefs and begin to question them to some degree. We need to question, say, did Christ really rise from the grave? I mean, am I holding to this purely from an emotional bias that has been produced?
But that seems so much more difficult for today's believer than it was for the believer who grew up in the 50s during the modern era, as the modern became the postmodern. Isn't that fair to say? Because of the things that you cited before, we have so much more information at hand, and so many more arguments, and so many voices that come into our heads that cause us to even question our own thought processes.
I think we can see the complexity of our world has changed over time. I think there's no doubt about that the number of influences, the availability of information is so staggering that no one ever thinks that they'll master any one subject, let alone multiple subjects, being able to put information together. But it's still, I don't think we believe more or less things. We have more beliefs or fewer beliefs than we had 50 years ago. In other words, we still create a body of knowledge that we cling to or that we live by. We still have certain things that we hold true, even if the very things that we hold true are things like there is no such thing as truth. That's still something that we're holding together, holding tightly, showing maybe some of the dichotomy that we have in some of the statements that are made.
One of the things that we have to do when doing theology, truly doing theology, and this is part of what we're doing here in Theology Unplugged, what the theology program is about on Bible.org, is taking our theology and deconstructing it. Okay? What we're saying is that no matter what age you are, you have a theology. Your theology needs to be deconstructed, taken apart, and then put back together.
Carefully examined and put back
That's
together.
right.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is the emotional commitment that you have to the theology needs to be let go of for a little bit, so that your intellect can wrestle with it, so that whenever it's rebuilt, you have a more true analysis of what things you can be certain of and what things you cannot be certain of.
Maybe an example, just to give the listeners something to hang their hat on here, is think back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you think of the context of that passage, you had the people who had been wandering in the desert. God had pulled Israel out of Egypt using Moses, and he was moving them towards the promised land. Because of their unbelief, they ended up wandering in the desert for 40 years while that older generation died off. And now a new generation comes. And what's the opening command to that new generation? It's to teach the younger ones what God had done in the past. What was the ultimate thing they were going to teach them? They were going to teach them the Exodus and teach them that God delivered this nation out of slavery and into freedom. But the whole challenge of the book of Deuteronomy, the whole challenge of the book of Joshua, and then later the book of Judges, is all, does that next generation get it? And do they get it means, do they take their beliefs and re-examine them and say, yes, I'm going to stake my life on these beliefs, not because my parents did, but because I've deconstructed them and I put them back together and I know that they are true, I know that they are right. It's always to make your beliefs your own. And that healthy examination of them, that healthy rebuilding of them, is that step towards doing that.
We're using a couple of words here that in a postmodern world are suspect. That is, we can know, and you said we take our theology apart so that we can be certain.
That's right.
Is there still is that unknown about our own intellectual capacity?
Well, here's what happens in a postmodern world, okay? At the university, at the schools today, from the smart aleck skeptic who wants to come and just kind of test you on your faith and show you how your faith is wrong in the chat room. What they want to do is deconstruct it, okay? And then stop.
Right.
I want you to deconstruct your faith and then stop. Once the building of your faith is taken down, now you can truly see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and then they want to say, see?
Yeah, that's right. But what we want to do is say, yes, you're right about the deconstructing part, but you're not right about the reconstructing part. You have to start reconstructing. And whether you think it or not, you're reconstructing. But you're doing it off a bad methodology and one that's not thought through well. And what we seek to do, what we're doing right now is teaching theological methodology. Let's learn that it is necessary first to deconstruct so that we can reconstruct. And by doing this, we're not becoming postmodern. We're not all three here saying, okay, we can see that postmodernism is right. All we're doing is saying that all of our beliefs need to be based upon not just purely emotional commitments, but those emotional commitments need to come from an intellectual commitment. And we're saying an intellectual commitment is not wrong because God created the intellect. God created the mind. That's what he uses. As Jonathan Edwards says, God wants to reach the heart, but he does not bypass the mind.
Sure.
And so we're really in the theology program, Theology Unplugged. We work off of one statement. We're here to reclaim the mind for Christ. We've lost our mind. People have deconstructed and we have lost our mind and said, okay, let's just join the world and act as if there is no truth out there.
Rome, he keeps saying we.
I guess he's looping me into this. But I think we can see this
Editorial
already.
we, okay? I just assumed.
Yeah. Right.
I think we can see this as being biblically grounded. I mean, even the basic Christian command of loving. How are we to love? Well, 3 times in the New Testament, Jesus summarizes the entire Old Testament law by saying that what it ultimately is saying is love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And even in one author's rendition of it, love with all your strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, your love isn't just an emotional thing. It isn't just a thing of the will, but it also is a thing of the mind. To love our God with our mind would probably involve knowing who our God is. And he's given us his revelation, which is the Word. In other words, it's multi-aspect.
Let me see if I can play a little bit off the postmodern view here and ask you this. Obviously, our minds, they're flawed. They're part of the fall. We have difficulty with logic. So is it possible, when you say certainty, when you say no, is it possible that what we're looking to come to here is a place where intellectually we are certain enough to believe that there's never going to be a 10? Or are you saying theologically there's a 10?
I'm saying that it all is based upon the evidence.
Yes.
Okay?
It's not proof, it is evidence.
Yeah, that's right. It's all based upon the level of certainty that we can come to. Whenever you are in a court system, in the law, in American law, the burden is not upon the prosecution to prove something beyond any doubt, is it? No. It's on the prosecution to produce evidence beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly.
And I think that's the only thing that we can do as well. It doesn't mean it's wrong at all. It doesn't mean because there is some doubt out there, but it's not reasonable, it's wrong. Let me tell you something. Did you know I'm not intellectually 100% certain that tomorrow the sun is going to rise?
Sure.
Okay, are you?
No.
Okay. How come? That's crazy. Then the sun might not rise then, right? Is that what you're saying? The sun might not rise?
Might not.
Okay. Then I gotcha. You should not be preparing tonight as if the sun is going to rise.
Well, no,
you're foolish for believing that the sun is going to rise, right? Because you have some doubt.
There's a difference in preparing and not being certain, though. I mean, that comes back to my question. Can I come to a point of enough certainty that I can commit myself, my soul, my spirit, to a truth, but not say, yeah, that's a 10.
You have to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's not one thing in this world you'll ever believe.
The simple example we could use to illustrate this would be sitting on a chair. It's the one that's used all the time in philosophy.
The sun was already a simple example.
Yeah, but I didn't get it. But this one I might.
That's a good one.
The idea real simply is when you look at a chair, you could say, yeah, I know that'll support me. I know that'll hold me. But merely looking at it doesn't show that you're actually willing to act on it.
That was not as good as the sun.
However, when you sit down on that chair, you don't know 100% that it does. Everyone knows the story of when someone sits on a chair and the chair breaks and everyone laughs and all that. It does happen. It can happen. And it will probably happen again in the future. But we still don't live like, well, no chair will support us. We always live assuming chairs will support us, even though, in fact, some chairs do not support us.
Have you ever seen the movie What About Bob?
I have.
one of the great all-time movies.
Hysterical.
I just saw it a few days ago, and as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, this guy is insane, clinically insane, right? Why? Because he's scared everywhere he goes, right? He takes cloth with him to open the doors.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. Everything that he does, he's afraid is going to lead towards something that causes his disease, that causes his death, whatever it may be. And, whenever you look at the chances, whenever you say, okay, Bob, why are you so scared to go outside? Well, I'm scared there might be some type of amoeba that gets in through my shoe and gets into my foot through the skin pores and then comes into my body and infects me. Is that a possibility? Sure it is. I mean, he's dealing with real possibilities, but the definition of an insanity does not mean that there is not possibilities out there. It means that they are so far out there that if you live your life according to the exception, then you are, by definition, insane. And that is the same thing with religion. A lot of people are out there saying, because you do not have 100% certainty that there will not be something that gets into my foot whenever I'm walking outside, then you are crazy for believing it. Because I am not 100% certain, as we talked about last time, that God exists, that Christ rose from the grave, that all of these things. I may have emotional certainty, like we said last time, but intellectual certainty. Because I'm not 100% certain, that means you're wrong. That's crazy. That's just like saying Bob is justified for not going outside. That's clinically insane. And so for people to require the level of certainty that they require sometimes, that is in other areas besides morals and metaphysics, religion, the definition of insanity. Why can't it be now?
We've demonstrated it's not even true in the realm of naturalistic science. That's right. Because they're finding new things that contradict old principles that they had. Was that better than a sun? I think What About Bob was better than the sun.
I'm not sure why I've never seen Michael outside.
I did. I didn't. You didn't let me finish the sun one.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I forgot it anyway.
Okay, let's move on.
The listeners understood the sun one and they liked it.
How then?
Rome's going to get letters about the sun.
We still have modernists, and to a degree, we've established we're modernists. And we have the postmodernists that we are to interface with in the world. How do the two communicate?
Well, maybe one thing that would be helpful is to give some characteristics that...
You notice how you always ask a question, and then we always act like you asked a different question and go and answer something different.
I figured you were running for office. That's Go ahead.
I think if you take this vote... I think there's some hallmarks. I think there's some characteristics that tend to define, these aren't absolutes, but they tend to define how modernistic thinking works, how postmodernistic thinking works. The modernist values the intellect. It's that reason, back to the idea of Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, reasoning things out. Postmodernism values anti-intellectualism. That's not what they prize. They don't prize people sitting and thinking.
But they make rational arguments in support of it.
Like, rational argument may be a self-defeating argument, like you've brought up many times. They bring up self-defeating arguments if you're a hard postmodernist. You say that there is no such thing as truth. Is that a truth statement? If it's a truth statement, then you have self-defeated your whole philosophy.
Sure.
It's like saying, I can't speak a word in English. Okay? Just by saying that, I've just now defeated the entire premise of the statement. If I said my wife has never been married, okay, it's a self-defeating statement. She can't be my wife by definition if she has never been married. And so we have self-defeating statements. The truth is there is no truth. It's a self-defeating statement. So I understand where you're coming from.
You just want me to get off that bandwagon, right?
I want you to get off the bandwagon only in this sense, to understand that they're not all that way. Many of them will state that, and I think that we need to just bring up statements like that. Wait a minute, that's self-defeating. But a lot of them are just dealing with the certainty factor.
Yeah.
But again, you can get into the same issue. You can say, I am certain that we can't be certain. Well, how certain are you that you can't be certain? Are you 100% certain? No, I'm only 99% certain. Okay, well, let's go.
We got a 1% to work with.
Yeah, that's right.
Another example. Modernism values reason. Postmodernism values feeling. They would rather have the appropriate response that generates feelings and emotions, not that that's the only basis, but yet it's Still, it's more of an emphasis how it makes you feel than, in fact, how you've reasoned it out. Maybe I'll give you a few of them, and that'll give us some fodder for discussion. A modernist is an optimist. Postmodernism is more pessimistic, much less optimistic. A modernist has hope for the future. Often, like I said, it can be characterized in technology. They really believe our science, our technology, our development, industrialization, philosophical advancements, the whole theory of evolution that was thought to finally explain what really happened in those days of creation. The idea we can reject the Bible because it really didn't explain how creation happened, and we can figure it out by science. That's that objectivism that often modernists claim. The modernist has hope for the future. The postmodern has despair for the future in many ways. A modernist is objective. A postmodern is much more subjective or even relative. A modernist is often exclusive, and a postmodernist is much more pluralistic or inclusive. A modernist values the scientific method. A postmodernist distrusts the scientific method. A modernist says that man is evolving, and a postmodernist says man is devolving. In many ways, if you look at how the Bible is describing man, how the Bible is describing our anthropology, it is in many ways some of those characteristics of man that are on the postmodern side. The idea that we're devolving, that sin is destroying us rather than that we're actually getting better and better.
It seems that Christian theology, indeed Judeo-Christian theology, is apart from both of these views. Because, we do take a rational view. We do adopt a modernism, but we don't say anything else is the hope of mankind except for the Word of God and in God's Son, Jesus Christ, and His salvation. So we're not in either camp in many of these issues. And we are optimistic in Him, but we are pessimistic about the ends of the world. And you look at Revelation, it's not pretty.
Yeah, and what you're saying is we don't adopt wholeheartedly the paradigm of either worldview.
Sure.
We have aspects which we believe culture necessarily is going to represent the image of God to some degree. Just because people are fallen does not mean they are not still in His image. And so therefore they're going to display a lot of His image. Sometimes they display His image in the culture better than the church does whenever the church goes bad. I think of legalistic churches and such as that, and then whenever there's people outside the church who are willing to be gracious, and so their culture is a gracious culture, whereas the church becomes legalistic, and the reversal happens. Mm-hmm. So we're not one way or the other. We are saying, just like you said, Christians really transcend. We should see ourselves, our paradigm, our worldview is transcending that which is going on in the world as a wholesale worldview that we're to adopt. I mean, all we're doing is we're evaluating culture, and we're saying, okay, what things can we pick up on, and what things can we see? But postmodernism, the reason why we're spending so much time on it is because it is a major paradigm shift that the entire world is going through. Right now, underneath our nose, the last 20 years have seen more of a change in our view of truth than has happened since the Renaissance, or even possibly all of world history. And people are just now beginning to understand the impact that it has. And as theologians, as Christians, as people who are representatives of Christ, we've got to understand our culture.
And that's such a key point. It's so important to understand that we're not changing truth. Our God is timeless. Our God does not change. He remains omnipotent. He remains omniscient. But how we communicate that to our changing world changes. That's why theology always develops. Theology is always changing, not because God is changing, but because our world is changing. Theology is explaining God to our world. And as our world changes, theology changes and develops to do that.
Now, you're saying some things there that are going to raise a lot of eyebrows. Now,
he always says things that raise eyebrows. Sometimes it raises his own eyebrows.
Because
listening to it afterwards.
It seems to me you're saying there is not a firm basis of truth in theology.
Are you saying that?
What I'm saying is theology is not truth itself. Theology is the explanation to the people. It's the explanation. In other words, who God is isn't changing.
Yes.
But theology, again, is that relationship of how we explain God. And this is why it's so important in what we're talking about. If our world is adapting these postmodern tendencies, allow me to call them that for lack of a better term, then the church needs to be able to present the gospel in light of how postmoderns or the things that postmoderns value. Let me explain that.
What you're saying is we should be studiers of culture. Right? That's part of our responsibility. Not separatists from culture, but engaged in studiers of culture, because that's so important. You've got to repeat that, because, like you said, raised eyebrows, that'll raise some eyebrows, because most of us think if we're in church, let's get away from culture. Okay, we need to be engaged in culture, understanding, mixing and mingling with the people, just like Christ was.
You're in the world, don't be of the world.
That's right. And that's exactly right. Christ is the example. He didn't appear outside of culture. He appeared and addressed and walked in really the filth of the culture, if you look at what he did. And in there, he spoke in the truth. And that's really our job. The church always sits in its culture, but it speaks the truth into its culture, and so it must understand the culture. And I think that's.
Are you saying we can't do theology without understanding our culture?
I'm saying that we couldn't even be Christian without living within the culture in which we're put into. Our Christianity reflects the culture we're sitting in. It's impossible to be any other way. In other words, we're always affected by our culture, but what we have to be on guard against is that the culture doesn't then dictate who the church is, and that's where we have to be so careful. Let me give you an example. Let me do a quick example to show you the difference between the church speaking to a modern and this church speaking to a postmodern person. We want to present the claims of Christ. We want to present Christ, that he in fact did die and rise again, the bodily resurrection of Christ. And so we can write books that help people to understand the death and resurrection of Christ. Evidences, if you will, that demand a verdict.
Yes.
And they do demand a verdict if you value the reason. If you value the reasonableness of the evidence, it demands a verdict. But if you're someone who doesn't value reason, then it's not evidence that demands a verdict, it's the authenticity that demands a verdict. It's not one book against another book, it's understanding the audience you're presenting to. What are you presenting? You're presenting the truth of Christ. It doesn't change. But the way you present it, evidence versus authenticity, both need to be true for the Christian. But to the world that values one over another, we have to be aware so that we can better communicate the truth of God's goodness.
Can I jump in and say something real quick? I know we're just about out of time here, but what Rome has just expressed is an incarnational view of theology. What we're doing is essentially the same thing that God has done from the very beginning. He has spoken in our language, written according to our writing styles, used people who were in our culture, told stories that went along with what we would understand, just like in the Proverbs, he wrote Proverbs. It's not an angelic type of literature. It is something he utilized in an incarnation model. He condescended to us in our language and used Hebrew, used Greek, used epistles, used gospels, used all of these things because he was coming to our level. That's what we need to do. We need to quit separating ourselves from the culture and saying that we will not stoop to your level whenever God, from the very beginning, has stooped to our level in order to understand and communicate with us. And all we're doing here is saying, let's understand the culture so that we can communicate to them.
Very good. Just a real quick vote between you two. How's the church doing on that?
Better. That's a relative statement, isn't it? I think generally speaking, we're getting better. I mean, it's a recognition of our need.
Rome?
Yeah, I think there's a move towards authenticity, and I think that has been so helpful from the postmodern view.
Let me give you an illustration of the sun. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, guys, thanks so much for being with us today. Friend, thank you for being here as well. We'll have more scintillating discussion and, a few eyebrow raisers as we continue our discussions here on Theology Unplugged. We're glad you've joined us. A reminder again that Michael and Rome will be taking your questions on future programs. Email them to theologyunplugged@bible.org. For Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke, I'm Greg Cromartie. We invite you to join us again.
Theology Unplugged.
think theology's for the clergy. I just believe in Jesus.
Certain hermeneutics of eschatology demand an exegetical approach.
I think you shouldn't question what you were taught in church. Isn't that blasphemy or something?
Theology Unplugged.
Welcome back. I'm Greg Cromartie. With me are the hosts of Theology Unplugged, Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke. These gentlemen are graduates of Dallas Theological Seminary. Both are on staff at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas, and they are instructors in the theology program, which Michael also directs. The theology program is an academic study course for lay people, and it can be found on Bible.org. Gentlemen, welcome back, and Lindsay, welcome to you as well. This is Michael's sister, Lindsay. Say hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
I knew she was going to do that. Thought I'm the straight man here. I'm the straight man. Well, we talked last time, guys, about the questions that postmoderns ask, and we're moving now into a Christian view of truth. That is also going to deal with some of the spin that postmodernism puts on us and that we put on it as well. Does it not, Michael?
Well, the idea here is that if postmodernism is truly in our culture, then to some degree the church as a whole is affected either positively or negatively by postmodernism. And it's as one of my professors used to put it, the sins of the culture become the sins of the church. The difficulties of postmodernism become the difficulties of the church. The questions, the struggles of postmodernism become the questions and the struggles of the church. So we've got to first look, when we say what is the Christian view of truth, we've got to understand that there is not really so much a monolithic view on this right now. And so as I say that, I sound almost postmodern. You know, let's dodge the objective answer and make you understand that there are many different views out there about this. But that's true. Right now, we've got to deal with that first. We've got to deal with the religious spin or the Christian spin that is placed upon truth by the effects of postmodernism, by the emotionalism, by the desire for people to lead with the idea of fairness and emotions and tolerance and those types of things.
And compassion is a singularly Christian, Judeo-Christian perspective on truth. I mean, God is compassionate. He is merciful. He is graceful.
That's right.
So it has informed postmodernism.
And when we say what? Speak the truth in
love.
Yeah, or speak the truth in compassion. And so we've got to look at it and ask the question, has postmodernism affected the church to some degree to where it has corrupted the truth of the church? And so what I want to do is, like we looked at last time or in the time before about the different terms that we needed to be familiar with, I'm going to go through a few terms here. And these terms are ways in which postmodernism is affecting the church. The first one, don't know if you guys have heard of that, I know Rome has, but the idea of universalism. Universalism is the belief that all people, good or bad, will make it to heaven. Okay? Universal salvation.
Yes.
Now, that may seem like something that's far out there and, you know, just cults believe it or some far out Christians, but it's really not true. You see it more and more being adopted in general by Christian communities.
Yes.
Whether it be on the internet, sites that are promoting universalism, whether it be on a general view of a Christian culture that hopefully God will just save everybody, and that's what I believe that He is going to do, or outright promotion of it by people on chat rooms and forums and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I recall just in the last couple of years that a well-known African-American pastor who has great respect across the board in evangelicalism, and especially in media, has adopted universalism. As he's battling the battles now, but he adopted the view.
That's right. That's right. You're going to.
So it isn't just the extremes. It's coming right into the mainstream.
And postmodernism is, and of course, you know, I'm assuming up front that postmodernism is the effect or the cause for the effect of universalism, which I do agree. I do believe to some degree that its proliferation, its widened acceptance is based upon the postmodern idea. I don't want there to be a hell. I mean,
Sure.
Universalism is a very attractive option for people who don't really like the view of hell. I don't know anybody in here who really likes the idea of hell.
Right. It just promotes the compassion we would have for people, for all people. It's, again, even tied to tolerance, that we accept people as they are, and whether you think differently than the culture does, if you act differently than I was raised, nonetheless, we want to accept you. And ultimately, Universalism says we want God to accept you. We want God to take on the doctrine of tolerance.
Well, it depends, too, on who you're talking about going to hell. I mean, I think this is probably true in the postmodern world as well. In general, we don't want to hell. But there are a few people we'd love to send there.
Sure. I think as on a personal basis you would, but on a confessional basis, you're basically saying, I want everybody to get there.
Get there.
Well, and I
exactly.
think being a Christian, we are to be humble and not think better of ourselves than someone else. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going to look at somebody who wasn't raised the same way I was and say, well, they don't know Jesus and they're going to go to hell and I'm not. And they're a better person than I am. And that's not fair. It goes back to the fair, postmodern. It's not fair. It doesn't make sense to me.
And not only that, Lindsay, what she says, whenever she says, I look at myself and I see that I'm not very good,
mm-hmm.
that is a postmodern tendency,
mm-hmm.
not a modern tendency. Because what would the modern say? He would look at himself and say what?
I am
good.
Yeah.
I'm evolving. I'm getting
mm-hmm.
better and better.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not where I'm at,
Survival
where I'm supposed to be,
fittest.
I will be there sometime soon.
Yeah, in fact, we are still seeing that. We see people who will say, basically, mankind is good at its core.
Yeah.
That's the modern view.
Yeah.
Postmodernists are now coming around saying, boy, everybody's pretty awful.
Mm-hmm. And then part of the problem is we're a little inconsistent, so sometimes we carry something from both camps and try and reconcile those. Because we want to see man as essentially good. Mm-hmm. We really do.
It's interesting how that affects political structures as well, because those who would believe in socialism, communism, have to believe that man's pretty good. It's a scientific thing. Man's all good, therefore I'll work for the good of the state or the society as opposed to in my own self-interest. So it affects everything, not only religion, but all the way to politics and in our interpersonal relationships.
It does,
as well.
and then once you establish something as your theology based upon an emotional reaction or a cultural norm, then you will begin to use that which is already established and read it into the text wherever you want to find it. Mm-hmm. And say that the places that you do find it are the clear places of Scripture, and the other places that seem to go against it, that's when we become agnostic. I know those hell passages, but those are so obscure and so difficult to understand, we can't really build too much upon that. But let's go to the clear passages that teach that God loves everybody, and that he is in the process of redeeming what? All of His creation. And is He just going to redeem part of it and leave the other part? Or that will say He was not victorious in the complete redemption, the restoration of all things, as Peter says in Acts chapter 4. Well, if He's going to restore all things, does that mean all people? That's very clear to me. So the main theme of the Bible is one of restoration. And you talk about this hell that is obscure and difficult, mainly talked about with demons, which, Universalists would say demons, no problem there. Christian Universalists, if there can be termed such a group, would say those are the obscure passages and you're building a doctrine on that. The clear thing is God is redeeming the entire world. But as you can see here, as I've said these things, it begins to become persuasive in a way because you want to step forward that way. Mm-hmm. Your emotions want to lead you. Hey, could it be possible there really isn't a hell? Mm-hmm. I mean, think of it if it was really possible. All of a sudden, you found out that hell was a folk theology.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is where it's so important to be grounded in our doctrine, to understand what is essentially Christian, what is essential Christian doctrine. That's really what we're about here, is trying to understand what are the essential things of the faith that do not change. Because things like universalism, we would want to say that only happens on the outside of the church, but we've already started to say that we recognize it's inside the church. It is the church looking more like its culture, or the church taking on the sins of the culture. And as attractive as it is, and as much compassion as that doctrine appears at first, it is essentially non-Christian. It is essentially something other than that which is Christian doctrine.
Let me take it one step further with this, and then we need to move on to talking about the next kind of spin on postmodernism. But listen, if you are one who wants to not believe in hell, which I think there's probably not any of us who want to believe in hell, but if you're one who is just really leads with your emotions first, and you have the doctrine of hell, which is a very emotionally troubling doctrine. I mean, I think it's the most emotionally troubling thing about Christianity's message, period.
Sure.
And you come to a passage and somebody says, let me prove to you that there is no eternal punishment. In Romans chapter 5, verse 18, it says, so then, as through one transgression there resulted in condemnation to all men. Okay? And I say, who are those all men? Who are they?
Humankind.
Humankind. Through the one transgression, what was the one transgression?
Adam's sin.
Okay. Who all is affected by the one sin?
All mankind.
Who's left out of that? Not a single person?
No.
Not even one individual gets left out of that.
No.
Okay, so in all men, whenever Paul is talking about it in Romans 5, verse 18, so then, as through the one transgression that resulted in condemnation to all men, even so through the one act of righteousness, okay, who's the one act of righteousness?
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ act. There resulted in justification of life to all men. Okay? So, if the all men in the first part of the passage means all men, without anybody excluded, what does it mean in the second part of the passage?
Seems like it should mean the same thing.
That's right. That's what some commentators have used, and they will hover around this verse and really use this, and that will become the hallmark not only of their theology here, but the hallmark of everything they are pursuing. And so they will set up websites and chat rooms and everything to say that there is no such thing as hell, and it becomes so focused upon that everything else is ignored. And so whenever you interpret passages such as, the hell passages, you would say, well, this is the clear passage in Romans 5:18. Those other ones are the obscure passage that I'll have to remain agnostic on. So you can build a doctrine of universalism. I've just demonstrated how you can do that as a Christian, and now lead with your emotions.
But isn't the object of doing theology to take all of these pieces and put them together and bring them into a harmonious
The fallacy I just exhibited, or just showed, is called the fallacy of selective use of text.
Okay.
Isn't that also eisegesis?
Eisegesis, sometimes it could be, but what you're talking about also is a better way to put it today is cut and paste theology.
Sure.
You just highlight the ones that you want and paste those in. And
you
don't
call
look at
those
the context of the
proof
whole.
texts.
Yeah, that's right.
Same thing.
Exactly. But universalism is being fueled by postmodern's emotionalism. That the emotions are not necessarily a bad thing, but whenever they are the
driving thing.
Yeah, whenever they are your first foot forward, you've got problems.
Yeah. Okay. Some other spins.
Pluralism. Now, pluralism is a little bit different and a little bit more even widespread within Christian circles. Pluralism is the belief that there are many ways to God that are equally valid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So now at this point, we've changed it around a little bit. It's not that everybody's going to get to heaven, but all good people will get to heaven.
Through various means.
Through various means.
Whatever their tradition happens to be.
Anything. All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah.
Not you.
Not this Rome. So, with plural, let's talk a little bit about how this interfaces with culture. We hear a lot about pluralism in our culture. We hear about multicultural pluralism. Is that the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing here? It's just removed from its religious context?
Yeah, in a sense, what we're saying is whenever we talk about we live in a pluralistic culture, we're simply saying that we live in a cultural diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever we talk about religious diversity, we recognize there is pluralistic religious diversity that exists. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a fact. But whenever we say that there is religious diversity that exists and all of them are equally valid, that's whenever it becomes pluralism.
Essentially, we're talking about the same thing that we did in the last program and when we talked about tolerance and intolerance.
Sure.
This is now saying not only do you need to tolerate those people, but tolerating means if they believe it, it's equally valid to what you believe. Same type of thing.
This is where the claim of exclusivism comes from Christianity and where it's often attacked.
Arrogance.
How arrogant of Christians to state that their way is the only way, when I have good religious writing that tells me that this way is a particular way that would work, or that way is a particular way that would also work.
Okay.
It's that's where the attack comes, that exclusivism and tolerance are opposites. And so it creates this polar effect. And they put Christianity in the camp of exclusive because of the claims of Christ. Jesus stating, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me, which seems to be a very exclusive claim. And therefore tolerance is not only what the word should mean, is tolerating another view, but actually endorsing and accepting it as true.
Sure.
Which has never been what tolerance has meant. But it is how it's used in our society today.
Right.
Tolerance really means accept and approve.
Sure. Yeah. It's a new definition of
Or
tolerance.
compromise.
So what is the Christian counterpart to that?
To pluralism? Mm-hmm. Well, you mean what is the Christian view as
Yeah,
opposed
we're
to
talking about the
pluralism?
Christian view of truth and how it's been spun upon by...
Well, we got to keep on spinning it first before we get to
Okay,
it. I know
well,
you're anxious to get there.
go ahead, yeah.
We've got all kinds of spins that we place upon these things.
The modernist in me is just crying out for
So
certainty.
we're getting from the furthest away or the most affected, which is universalism, down to pluralism, what we just went over. Now let's talk about syncretism. Syncretism is a little bit different, another type of spin. And is essentially what syncretism is you pick the best from whatever religious worldview that you want to pick from, and you kind of mix it together. So if you like Christianity's view of redemption, then you take that and take Christ. But if you like the Jewish idea of ascetics or of the way that they are to eat, then you take that. And then if you like the Buddhist idea of having, little temple gods, then you take that as well. And so you take all of these together, and it's kind of a synchronization of them. I got an application for a wedding the other day, and the person was a Buddhist Catholic. Okay, so I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to marry them or not, because I wasn't sure if they were talking about a universal Buddhist or a Buddhist Christian, which really, there are people out there who say, yes, I'm a Buddhist Christian.
But it's important to bring out syncretism. This idea has been around a long time, right from the beginning. It's in the Old Testament, where God gives the Old Testament Israel a way to, the way to worship Him, and they start to mix with those Canaanite peoples around them, and they create things like high places. They worship via practices that are done. There's points in the Old Testament where they're involved in child sacrifice, clearly forbidden by God, but endorsed by other gods around them.
And even at the same time, while they are doing those things, they are still claiming to be the children of Yahweh, but they're just mixing in a little bit of things here. Syncretism.
Yeah, worshiping Yahweh the way Molech asked to be worshipped. Molech, a pagan god from the Old Testament.
Who required the children to pass through the fire.
Yes.
Essentially. Okay, are we through spinning yet?
No, we got
a lot of spin to go.
We've got one more spin to go.
Okay.
Now, this one is the closest. As we've moved through, we've become less and less universalist, more, towards an objective stand, although you can't really tell it yet. But this one's called inclusivism. Inclusivism would state that Christ is the atonement, or is the only atoning sacrifice that God has ever accepted or will ever accept for anybody to be able to make it into His presence. But knowledge of Christ is not the only way to get the atonement applied to you.
Okay, so it's a mixture of a Christian way of salvation with the all roads lead to.
Yeah, that's right. It's here's let me get real technical here, and then I'll explain it.
Please.
It is that Christ is needed ontologically, but He's not needed epistemologically. The idea is what Christ did, the actual being and essence of the cross, is needed by all people.
Sure.
But knowledge of Christ is not needed by all people. So it may be that you have someone who is out on the island. Remember, we're trying to deal with these people that we're very compassionate about and we're very emotional about, who have never heard the gospel, who are far off, and have never had a missionary come to them. If that is the circumstance, and they truly tried to follow God to the best of their own ability, according to the dictates of their conscience, it's not that their God is real. Their God is still false that they followed. But Christ understands that they tried to do the best that they could according to the revelation given to them. And all the revelation that they had was what their parents taught them all their life. And so they followed that. So therefore, Christ applied his blood to them. So whenever they get to heaven, they understand it epistemologically, but it was only applied to ontologically.
Let me ask an unplugged question. Suppose then that a missionary finally limps into their village after trekking through miles of Amazon rainforest and tells them about Jesus, and a few accept and a few reject. What happens to those who reject?
Well, you're talking about according to
according to that view.
Well, they won't reject if they have truly accepted beforehand. It's kind of like the Cornelius instance in Acts chapter 10. Whenever Cornelius he was a God-fearer, even though Christ had already died and risen from the grave, but he had never heard about Christ yet. But the text says he was a God-fearer, one who loved God and gave tithes to the temple. And whenever Peter came to him, he automatically accepted because he was already a child of God. Right. All childs of God will accept the truth that has been given to them.
From my first day as a believer, I was told that people who respond to the light given to them, that God will give them more light. But that's essentially what you're talking about here.
It's almost a bridge from what I'm talking about to the pure restrictivist camp or exclusivist camp that we're going to be talking about.
So from back in the 70s, when I became a believer, this view was already somewhat penetrating Christian theology.
Well, let me read this statement to you from Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Council, Vatican II, 1962 to 1965, on this very subject. It says, "But the plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge their Creator. In the first place of these are the Muslims, whom, professing to hold to the faith of Abraham, along with us adore the one merciful God, who on the last day will judge mankind. Those also can attain salvation who through no fault of their own," key phrase, "through no fault of their own, do not know the gospel of Christ and his church, do not have an epistemology of Christ, yet sincerely seek God, moved by grace, strive by their deeds to do his will as is known to them through the dictates of their conscience." So,
and that was what year?
That was 1962 to 1965 that council took place.
Vatican II. Then those who believe this, I would think they would say, let's not do any mission work. Don't go, because if you tell them, then the responsibility is on them. And you might send them to hell.
Exactly. That's right. And it is a good point. I mean, the moment they were better off in their ignorance.
Sure.
You're better off not knowing the truth than knowing the truth and rejecting it. I mean, that is just the plain statement of this entire view.
Which shows us why this isn't Christian, because essentially this is the exact opposite of what God said from the beginning. Mm-hmm. He talked about creating a man and a woman and allowing them to know each other. As a matter of fact, he wanted to know his creation. And so our God is a God who wants knowledge, who wants to give information. That's why we have his word. So in effect, this idea, this doctrine, this heresy is directly in opposition to God's basic sentiment of being a knowable God.
Rome got very unplugged when we called that a heresy just then.
Do you want to disavow that?
No, I'm just telling you, he got unplugged.
Okay. It sounded pretty plugged to me.
I mean, it was like it was this doctrine, comma, separated by this heresy.
Wanted to make sure we call them like we see them.
Yeah, I wasn't hearing any unplugged there at all. I was totally plugged into that one. Okay.
Maybe that is plugged up, isn't it?
Yeah, that
was
is
plugged.
That was plugged.
Unplugged would say, I'm not sure if this is a heresy, right?
Yeah, that would be the more postmodernist.
That's right. Hey, unplugged does not mean postmodern. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, no, I wasn't, but I was going with the flow, man. Okay, are we done spinning?
Well, we're almost out of time. So we got to spin a little bit longer.
Okay, well, let's spin just a little bit more.
All right. Lindsay, do you got any spin to put on this?
We can illustrate this more if you want.
No, let's ask this question, okay? Let's get real practical with these. Universalism, pluralism,
All right, I got
syncretism,
a question.
inclusivism.
Do you think my friend's mother, she says she loved Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior, but did the incense and did the statues and whatever other rituals Buddhism calls for, is she going to heaven?
Rome, take this one.
Yes. Or no.
Take your pick.
No. Let's deal with that, because that is a very important question. It is what people listening are asking. That's why Lindsay asked it, I'm sure. She's trying to represent them well, and we're trying to dodge it, but let's don't dodge it. That is a key question. Can somebody be saved at the same time as being a universalist, pluralist, syncretist, or inclusivist? My answer is, theoretically, of course they can. Mm-hmm. Of course they can if they trust in Christ. I mean, Christ did not come and say, as long as you have perfect doctrine,
exactly,
then you can be saved.
However, after saying that, we still would want to help inform them and correct them. Let me give a missions example to qualify exactly what was just said. When I was in Ghana, in West Africa, I could share Christ with anyone and they would accept, 100%. No problem at all. They would add Christ to whatever else they already believed in. And so if they believed in the goat god that they worshipped up on the mountain, if they believed in ancestral worship, if they believed in whatever they were choosing to worship, adding Christ to that was no problem at all. The key was, could you get them to accept Christ and reject all those others? And Michael's brought up the very important point. You don't get Christ once your doctrine's perfect. You got to keep working on your doctrine. You got to keep perfecting it, because we all have places where we need work. We all have places where we believe incorrectly. We all still carry some folk theology, but at the essence of the issue is, do they ultimately accept Jesus Christ as the payment for the sin which they are guilty of before God? And are they trusting in that to give them salvation?
And let's throw in a great Reformation term, sola fide, and it's by faith alone in Christ alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise we are saying, I mean, we've got to be very careful here, because like Rome said, they have to ultimately trust in Christ. But at the same time, I mean, people do continue on cultural practices, pagan practices, sinful practices after they become Christians, and we do not say, oh, you are not a Christian because you do those things. Sure. But we do say that there is a redeeming aspect once you have trusted in Christ that should show forth both in your practice and in your doctrine, both equally. And so whenever someone believes and trusts in Christ but remains a universalist, I think we do have cause to wonder whether Christ is really in them redeeming, because one of the primary messages of the Bible is that there is no universalism. There is no second chances. There is no other God but the one God. And he's pleading with them continually and continually sending people with the gospel message, with the plea and the message saying, come be restored. And so if we accept any of these, universalism, pluralism, syncretism, or inclusivism, in some sense we are denying a major tenet of Christianity. So like Rome may better ask the question, can you act Christianly and believe these things? And that would be a different answer. I would say no. That is not a Christian belief. It is an unorthodox belief. And so therefore, can you be a Christian and believe some of these things? It's possible theoretically. And it's probably even more probable in a culture where you already have these things, and then once you already believe in Christ, these things will be redeemed later on, maybe not immediately.
Okay. Well, guys, we have spun out. It's about all the spinning we can do today. Let's get more into, next time, into the Christian counters to these.
We will get there next time, I promise.
You're promising.
Yeah. We might even start there.
Really?
Oh, wait. We can't go there. Just kidding.
I was feeling good there for a moment. Well, we'll do that next time. We will indeed. Friend, we're glad you've joined us. Be sure to catch the next Theology Unplugged. Michael and Rome will be taking your questions via the web. Email yours to theologyunplugged@bible.org. For Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke, and for Michael's sister, Lindsay, I'm Greg Cromartie. We invite you to join us again for Theology Unplugged.
Theology Unplugged.
think theology's for the clergy. I just believe in Jesus.
Certain hermeneutics of eschatology demand an exegetical approach.
I think you shouldn't question what you were taught in church. Isn't that blasphemy or something?
Theology Unplugged.
Welcome to the program. I'm Greg Cromartie. With me are the hosts of Theology Unplugged, Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke. They are graduates of Dallas Theological Seminary. Both are on staff at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas, with boast as its pastor, Chuck Swindoll. Yeah, touch these guys. And they are instructors in the theology program, which Michael also directs. The theology program is an academic study course for lay people, and it can be found on Bible.org. And again, we are joined by Michael's lovely sister, Lindsay, to add her piece, which is always so much better than the two guys that are sitting across from me.
That's for sure. That's why we brought her.
Yeah, and a lot better to look at. So, okay, let's. Are we going to cover the Christian view of truth today, Michael?
Yeah, we're actually still in the epistemology idea. We're still talking about what is truth. We're still talking about how do we come to know truth. We're still talking about does truth exist, those types of things. And now we really need to focus in on what should the Christian view of truth be.
Okay, tell me what I'm supposed to think. Well, I'm a Christian, therefore.
We're all just going to stay silent here.
That's what I think normally. I want you to fill my head.
It's whenever we approach this, we've got to understand, first of all, like we said before, that as a Christian, we are not people who are trying to decide between postmodernism and modernism. We, in some sense, transcend culture. While we are placed within culture, we are above culture. As Christ said, I ask that you not take them out of the world, but preserve them while they are in it. And so the idea is that we are here in culture, we are trying to understand culture, but in some sense we shine as a great light within culture whenever we are reflecting the glory of God, whenever we are representing Him well. And so we need to see ourselves as such, not those that the light of culture is affecting us. And we've talked about the relative view of truth. Relative view of truth is basically the postmodern view of truth, that there is no truth or truth cannot be known with certainty. The Christian view of truth has more to do with the modern view of truth than it does the postmodern view of truth in a lot of ways. Let me explain. The modern view believes that truth exists whether or not you and I believe it. Okay? It doesn't matter whether you believe the truth or not, it has no bearing upon its truthfulness. Such as if there is a old saying, like Roma said before, does a tree, whenever a tree falls down in the wilderness and nobody is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And the modernist would say what?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course it does. The objective view of truth says it doesn't matter whether anybody's there or not. Truth is not a subjective reality. Otherwise, you're redefining what truth is. Just like we said before, I think we might have said this before, about the redefining of marriage. Okay, some people are wanting to say that marriage is to a man or a woman and a woman. Well, that's really redefining the term. The concepts underneath are what make the term what it is. And so therefore you cannot redefine the concept of marriage even though you redefine the term. And so a modernist would approach truth and say, what are you talking about, relative truth? That there's no such thing, that is a contradiction. Subjective truth, there's no such thing as truth that only exists in you. Well, that's not truth. What we're talking about is the concept where truth exists whether or not you believe it, or
whether or not you're even here.
That's right. There can be nobody alive, nobody to believe it, but it still exists.
Sure.
Right, and so that brings out the eternality of the view of truth. And that's why what we want to do is focus that on, for that to exist, for there to be something that's true for all times, or non-subjective, as our culture is trying to pin it, that then roots truth in eternal being, in an eternal God. And that's really what we're getting at. That truth, which transcends all time and transcends your acceptance of it, it's rooted in something eternal, ultimately, which is God Himself.
Okay. Christian truth will go one step further than the modernists. The modernists are saying only what you can experience, see, hear. It's empirical. Beyond that, you cannot go. Christians would say, yeah, we can have certainty. There is certainty in truth. There is absolute truth. But I can go beyond what I can touch, taste, feel, hear.
Well, let me give you a key verse that will help us out in that. Deuteronomy 29:29. It says, "The secret things belong to the Lord, but the things revealed belong to us and our sons forever, that we might observe all the words of his law." Now, the idea in this passage is that God is giving to the Israelites a revelation of himself. And Moses is telling them about this revelation, concerning this revelation. And the idea is, while there are secret things that belong to the Lord, there are things revealed. And those things revealed belong to us and to the generations that follow us. And so it's not that God has kept everything secret. Okay, the emphasis upon this verse is the things revealed, not the secret things. Many times we use this verse in that sense. Oh, let's show if something weird happens in our life, we say, oh, that's just the secret things of the Lord. Well, while there are secret things of the Lord, the emphasis of this passage is upon the giving of the law and the giving of revelation. And so he's saying, our God has given to us things revealed, and those belong to us. And it's not belong to you as an individual. He's not given each person their own little revelation. Therefore, it's a subjective reality that they have. But it's showing that something transcends not only all of the people who were there at Israel at the time, but that it transcends all of culture because it doesn't have any cultural boundaries. It says to our sons forever. The idea is not to our sons as long as they live in the land of Canaan, where it's culturally relevant to do these things. Not to our sons as long as they have this same mindset, but once they evolve in their mind and their thinking, then, these things won't be so bad anymore, such as homosexuality, once you understand the brain. He says forever.
Right.
And so the idea here is that the things revealed are from the Lord, which therefore make them objective and true for all people of all times. That is the thing that is certain. The uncertainty comes whenever we're trying to understand the things revealed.
Sure.
In other words, what we'd want to say is truth is knowable, but not all truth. So the Christian view of truth is a balance statement. It's the idea of Christians know a balance between revealed things and secret things. There are things of God that are true that we just don't know. He has not revealed them to us. But there are things that he has revealed and we can know them. And that's where we want to root our view of truth.
Let me ask you all this. Does the modernist leave any stone unturned when searching for truth?
I think he does.
Well, no, in his mind.
Oh, in his mind, no, absolutely not.
Is he searching to find a full body of knowledge or just partial?
Everything.
Everything. Okay.
In fact, the physics right now is still looking for the gut, the grand unified theory. They want a theory of everything put into one succinct piece of knowledge.
So would they focus upon the secret things or the things revealed?
Revealed.
Okay, the things revealed.
Sure.
And if you're saying I want to be a modernist Christian, if that's possible, let's go there. What are you going to emphasize and what are you going to neglect? Secret thing or the things revealed?
Revealed.
Things revealed.
Okay, and the secret things are going to be basically non-existent, right? Okay, now let's switch it around. Postmodernist approaching this. Which one do they focus upon?
Things.
Yeah, the occult. The hidden things.
The secret things. The things that can't be revealed. It can't be known. Let's don't go there. It's how can you know for sure whether God thinks this way? How can you know for sure that there is a hell? How can you know for sure this person's destiny? How can you know for sure anything? And so you leave yourself in a suspended state to where you're never intellectually engaged because everything is the secret things. So you never pursue the things revealed.
Which gives you great latitude in what you believe. Sure. And nobody can contradict you.
That's right. And in fact, nobody can live like that. Those are theoretical statements because nobody can live in absolute relativity. Right. Everyone actually has to follow a system. Everyone has to decide, yeah, I do need to eat. Even though maybe I can't prove that I need to eat, I do need to eat. I do need to sleep. I do need to drive on the right-hand side of the road if that's what the rest of the culture is doing. we come across that way sometimes, where we try and say, well, we can't know anything. If I can't know this, I can't know anything. We lump it all together, and that's in opposition to what Christian view of truth is.
Is this all a categorical question? How we categorize epistemology?
It somewhat is, but it's the idea again of sometimes our biggest flaw is the radical imbalance. Okay. And it's not seeing both, making it an either or. And you do see that even within postmodernism. People, as Rome said, they don't really live that way because it's an either or. It's not a both and. It's not that there are some things that we can be certain of and some things we can't be quite so certain of. It's either all or nothing. It's either we can be certain of everything or we can be certain of nothing. And then people choose sides and categorize the way they come to truth. And I think this presents a very balanced way of coming to truth here. The secret things belong to the Lord. Understand there are going to be things that you do not understand. And I'm never going to let you understand. If you're talking about the idea of predestination and how that interacts with human freedom, secret. Okay? I mean, it's just something we can't... When you're talking about the one God who eternally exists in three persons, secret thing.
Yeah, we can't. Our minds won't even wrap around such concepts. I mean, we talk about it, we believe it, but to get our minds... I remember when I was a kid, I used to lay at bed at night thinking, what was there before there was the universe?
Can't do it.
You can't do it.
My mind.
Because we are spatial. We're confined to space and time. We can't conceive of eternity yet either, what it is, because that's the way we... Whether it's a result of the fall or the way God created us, we are right now in those places where we can't go.
And that was something that was very insightful that you said, because you didn't say it was the result of the fall, our lack of knowledge.
Right.
You said whether it's a result of the fall or whether it's why God or how God created us. And to admit God created us with lack of knowledge, and that's okay. And that even in heaven, as most theologians would say, we will never have perfect knowledge about everything.
And we're going to be learning in heaven.
And that's why another way to couch this so the listener understands is to say that God created us finite, and so we can have knowledge, but we don't have all knowledge. But God is himself infinite, not without bounds of time and space, and he has all knowledge. So we want to understand that. We want to carry our definition of truth couched in those terms, that understanding.
This is totally unplugged here, but that is one of the thrilling things to me about heaven, is that we get to learn there. We get to explore and experience and have adventures and learn and get to know God better, even through all eternity.
Yeah, sometimes it's not the mysterious things of heaven, but it's the familiar things of heaven. And the familiar thing you're talking about is learning.
Yeah.
That is a great thing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that excites us.
It's not just playing harps. I've never been very good at that. I wasn't. Of course, I guess I got to learn.
You got eternity to do it.
You'll have time on your hands.
Let me introduce a couple of words. Each week I have to introduce a couple of new words. 1 to 2 at least, but let me introduce these two. It's cataphatic theology and apophatic theology.
Wow, what words.
These are very important words to understand, again, the Christian view of truth, because we'll see that the church has struggled with the secret things and the things revealed from its very beginning. Apophatic theology is literally negative theology. It is a way to do theology in which you emphasize the things that we do not understand by referring to them in the negative. Let me give you an example. We, as finite beings, cannot speak of an infinite God and do justice to him. All we will do is damage his character and who he is. Anything you say about God is coming from a finite mind, and if somebody believes it, then all of a sudden they're believing a what conception of God? A finite conception of God.
Sure.
And so therefore it's better not to speak about God. It's better to leave it in mystery, or if you do speak of him apophatically. Speak of him in terms of negation.
that he's not bound by time is how you would say it.
That's right.
Instead of saying he's timeless, you say he's not bound by time.
Good.
Yeah, or another way to say that is that God is eternal, but somehow in our finite minds we might be limiting God by merely calling him eternal. He might be larger or greater or bigger than that. So rather than possibly making an error there,
We can't understand eternity, the concept of it truly.
that's right.
Say.
We can just say he's not bound by time. We're not telling you what God is, we're just telling you what he isn't.
Well, he's not mutable, he's immutable. He's not changeable, it is that he is unchangeable. It's not that God experiences emotions the exact way we do because he is impassible, is the way that it was stated in the early church. So you notice how it is a theology of negation. We state what he is not, but we don't really state what he is because we cannot articulate truly what he is. But if we put it in the negative, we're safe.
To be fair to the early church, they were trying to not limit God or not put God in a box. That's the way we would talk about it today. And so they so wanted to acknowledge the mystery of how great God was, how much knowledge he had, or how timeless he was, that they'd say everything in the negative to the point where it came out of balance. They never said who God was.
But doesn't, if you're stating something in the negative, does it not imply the positive? You're saying
to some degree, but it doesn't limit the positive. The positive sometimes limits because of the language. Okay. And I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that this is the way the church dealt with it early on. So apophatically, we say we don't say what God is because we understand the limits of our own mind. Now, cataphatic is the way the West. That was the way of the East. The way of the Western Christianity took on more of a cataphatic theology. Cataphatic theology is affirmative theology. It's stating clearly, based upon the idea of revelation, based upon the idea of God creating language, based upon the idea of God creating the intellect, that we can describe who and what God is. Although we may not be able to understand it and articulate it fully, we can understand it and articulate it truly. And so cataphatic theology will always try to understand God and who he is, and therefore be more definitive about that.
How would you place the modern and postmodernist views within those two categories?
Well, how would you?
It would seem to me the apophatic would be the postmodern view.
Exactly.
And cataphatic is the modern view.
That's right. And you can split that up and say the Eastern Christianity's view is apophatic, the Western Christianity's view is cataphatic. You can split that up and say that the today, the Christian church that is more tending towards postmodernism is more in the sense, let's don't sit up and talk about doctrine all day. Let's talk about relationships. Let's talk about worship. Let's talk about mystery, those types of things. So therefore they would adopt more of an apophatic as the early church or the early Eastern church did. And then those who get up, Bible churches, take your Bible, let's open it up, let's exegete the Scripture, and I'm going to dogmatically state exactly what everything means and tell you why everybody else is wrong, and then tell you exactly what you should leave here believing. That is a cataphatic. Now, those are the extremes.
Sure.
And is one right and one wrong, or does it?
Well, it's always going to come down to what?
Balance. It's always about balance. And we can see even things that are positive. Cataphatic theology is positive. God did reveal things about himself to us. We don't want to say, well, God is... we don't know much about the character of God when the Bible clearly teaches us that God is a loving God. It also teaches us that God is a God of justice. It reveals that God is a God of mercy. He does tell us things about himself, and when he tells them to us in his word, we ought to bring them to bear. We ought to bring them out in our doctrine. Cataphatic theology is excellent. However, theologians can push that so far that they think that they can that they could mistakenly think they can define everything about God.
I heard.
And so there's the balance.
A Christian parachurch leader, who shall remain unnamed,
Michael Patton,
parachurch,
said, "We and our staff will go through the books of the Bible. We'll take it one verse at a time, and we will not leave that verse until we know what God emphatically meant."
Wow.
That's pretty cataphatic, wouldn't you think?
It's pretty cataphatic, pretty modern, pretty much full of certainty.
Would arrogance
Baptist?
move in here anywhere?
Well, if you were postmodern, they would say that's all
That's
it
totally
is
arrogance.
Yeah.
Well-
And to some degree, we'd have to admit that is.
Sure.
I mean, we've got to understand that balance applies to all of us in that whenever we read the scriptures, yes, there are some things that are clear, some things that are not so secret, but some things we get to and we're not sure. We have to leave there with some degree of doubt.
Take, for example, that verse in Deuteronomy chapter 29. It states clearly God has held some things in secret. So what are they going to do? Are they going to explain those things? Are they going to explain the very things that God says you can't explain? That becomes problematic.
Sure does.
Okay, so let's come down to really
The bottom line.
Let's go there. This is cataphatic to the core, right? What we as Christians need to do is we need to start with some type of skepticism.
Let's reroute this. We're talking about epistemology. That's our big topic. We've been talking about that for weeks.
Again, epistemology is?
Epistemology is how do we know what we know? What is the basis or our source for knowledge? What is the basis or our source for truth, which has really been the type of thing we've been discussing in epistemology. And so, as a summary statement, what Michael's going to get to here is these grand things. How do we know what we know? How ought we to live in a culture that's moving from modernism to postmodern, or maybe you're listening in an area that's truly postmodern, or maybe you're in an area that still is modern, or somewhere in flux in between. How do we know? What do we do? That's the question that we want to look at.
I think we've got to start from the very beginning with some sort of soft skepticism. The idea that you and I don't believe everything we hear. You and I remain somewhat uncertain about anybody's claims to truth. And I think this is very much biblical. I mean, in Proverbs 8:5, it says, "Who are the naive and discern wisdom, and you fools understand discernment." Discernment means that you are able to pick and understand whenever there is a multiplicity of ideas and truths out there. You are able to discern which one is the correct one. Therefore, you come at it with a skeptical mindset. Not that they are all true, but through discernment, you're able to choose among them.
I'm reminded of the Bereans, who
Exactly.
did not believe. They didn't take hook, line, and sinker what Paul was telling them.
Yeah, even Paul.
I mean, I believe Paul. Would you believe Paul?
I sure would. If it was after he rose somebody from the dead, I would really believe.
But the Bereans didn't.
Yeah.
They diligently searched the scriptures to see if these things were so.
That's exactly right. And so that's, again, it's balance. We want to be skeptical, but as Michael said, soft skeptical. We want to be careful. And to use the language that we used a few programs back, we want to keep the gates to our mind closed until we've analyzed something and then let it in. In other words, we're not going to just accept anything that's out there. Just because it appears on a Christian website or a Christian person who's somewhat famous said something, we don't just necessarily say, that is true. I accept that.
How do you feel about calling yourself a skeptic? Lindsay, what do you think of whenever, if you were to say to someone, oh, that guy's just a skeptic, what would you mean?
No, would be negative connotation.
Negative connotation meaning what?
He's just not accepting the Lord. He's not accepting the Bible.
And it's the idea that being a skeptic means that you won't accept those things, right?
Right.
That's not what we're saying. Soft skepticism does not say that you won't accept things. It is saying that whenever you do accept them, they have to go through criteria of discernment.
As you said, with the example of the Bereans, Greg, you said diligently search the scriptures. That's what the Bereans did.
They were soft skeptics.
They were soft skeptics, and what did they do once they searched the scriptures?
They believed.
They believed. They believed because what Paul said was true. But they didn't just say, oh, it's true because Paul said it. They said it's true because Paul said it, and the scriptures verified it. It was their source of discernment.
So we have taken a little bit from both worlds right now. We've been skeptical in the sense like the postmodern, in that I'm not really sure because traditions have led me wrong. But we have been positive in the sense of modern with discernment and with study. I will be able to figure it out possibly. And so once we start with soft skepticism, then we can move to a methodology of what's called perspectivism. In perspectivism, we understand that we as individuals do not have a corner on the truth.
It's not as if I have all knowledge to all questions. It's not as if I can sit by myself with the Holy Spirit and with my Bible and come to all understanding of Scripture. I need Rome. I need Lindsay. Don't really need you that much, but I need a lot of others.
Thanks.
Listen to this passage.
Just the announcer.
Proverbs 12:15. The way of the fool is right in his own opinion, but the one who listens to advice is wise.
And let me expand that. Not only do we need each other, not only do we need community, which is a hallmark of all the theology we do theology in a community. That's even why we only have more than one person on the radio. We're thinking, we're bouncing ideas off each other, we need each other. But not only do we need each other all today, but we need the saints that have gone before us, who were inspired and filled with that same Holy Spirit who speaks to us today. In other words, there's value in understanding where the church has sat on any one position throughout time. Not that they're always right, but boy, if for 2,000 years they've held one position and you want to deviate from that, you have to be very sure that you're doing that in a way that honors God in light of how many different believers you're going against.
Sure, which brings in something we've stated before. Our theology emanates not just from the Scripture, but from tradition, history, the creeds, the church councils, all of that. If we're going to be balanced, another key word here today, in our theology, we need to be partakers of all of those things.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And the final thing that we are trying to achieve to is to some degree of objectivism, which we believe is true, because we believe as Christians that there is objective truth that exists. We believe there's no such thing as a term called truth if you take the objectiveness away from it. It is not truth any longer. Proverbs also. We've gone through Proverbs 8:5, Proverbs 12:15, and Proverbs 23:23 says, acquire truth and do not sell it. It's an imperative that Solomon is writing to his son, and he says, go and acquire truth. If it were not possible to acquire truth,
he wouldn't have said it.
Wouldn't have said it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is the assumption of all of Scripture. I mean, it's a major theme, of course. It's the reason why all of Scripture is written, but we need to refocus upon that. We start as soft skeptics, understanding that there are untruths out there. We move on and understand that many people contribute to our view of truth or our understanding on a matter, and everybody has something to contribute to some degree, both alive and dead. And then we search for the truth, believing that the truth exists. Now, once that happens, if we can come to the truth, once we have battled and labored and fought and wrestled with issues, and then in the end we say, I have searched and searched and searched, but I'm not certain on the matter, that's when we move from cataphatic to apophatic. When we move and say, I guess this isn't a thing revealed of the Lord, therefore it's one of the secret things. But we don't start by saying, I assume this is probably one of the secret things, therefore I'm not going to study it out. We study it out, we search it out, search as a church, as a community, throughout history, and then finally we come to the conclusion, this is a secret thing of the Lord. So we're balanced.
It seems to me what you're talking about here is there is a sliding scale on that.
A scale of certainty.
A scale of certainty on that. Can we talk about the truths that are essential for orthodoxy next time?
That would be a good topic.
Let's do that. And since that is all the time we have today, let's get out of here and let people go back to what they were doing, reading their net Bible and perusing the Bible.org site. Friends, thank you for being with us. We're glad you've joined us. Be sure to catch the next Theology Unplugged. Michael and Rome will be taking your questions via the web. Email them to theologyunplugged@bible.org. For Michael Patton and Rhome Dycke, and for the lovely Lindsay, I'm Greg Cromartie. We invite you to join us next time for Theology Unplugged.
Theology Unplugged.